Sir, we can start the program?
Yes, start this program.
So, okay. So, welcome and good afternoon to everybody. I am Dr. Debashish Giri, Associate Professor in the Department of Information Technology of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology, formerly known as West Bengal University of Technology. Today is the special session on data and application security and privacy of the webinar series on cryptography, network security, and cybersecurity. It is organized by the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology, West Bengal, in association with Islamic University of Science and Technology, Jammu and Kashmir. In our inaugural ceremony, we have our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Saikat Maitra, and today's eminent speakers, Professor Elisa Batinio, Purdue University, USA, Professor Anupam Joshi, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, USA, Professor Bhavani Turai Singham, the University of Texas at Dallas, USA, and we are also having one person, Dr. Saranita De. He is also from the University of Maryland, USA, and Rohana Walsh is University of Texas at Dallas, and participants of the webinars. Now I request to our Honorable Vice Chancellor to inaugurate the session.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Giri. This is a great endeavor taken by our Department of Information Technology from the School of Computational Science under the stewardship of Dr. Debashish Giri and Dr. Somdatta Chakraborty. Dr. Somdatta Chakraborty joined here or not?
Yes. Sir, she has joined.
Dr. Somdatta Chakraborty and Dr. Debashish Giri and all other faculty members of Information Technology. And I'm very much, is proud of your activity because of this. Today, I had to give an interview regarding this importance of cybersecurity and how our university is taking part in it. And this is a matter of pride that almost every day on training programs or webinars or faculty development programs is being organized in cybersecurity. And this is the call of the time. I was reading on an article that now it is a basic necessity now. The understanding of cybersecurity by almost all the individuals because of the fact that in the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months after the pandemic scenario broken out in the entire world, there's all our this activities has been migrated to digital platform, and that is from a financial point of view, it's true. It's from academic point of view, it's true. From all this industrial activity, business activity, whatever it is, all these are mostly happening through digital platforms. So that means the cyberspace is going to be more and more important day by day. And this was the writing of the world too, because industry was migrating towards industry 4.0. There was an emergence of digital health. There was an emergence of huge applications of IoT gadgets and all these things, and because and the cyber physical interactions, these are going to be more and more prominent. And this is one of the important trend, globally important trend, that the world is moving to the cyberspace more and more, and almost all parts of our life that will be controlled by the cyber domain. So a huge amount of data that will be generated, and a huge amount of data will be transmitted, huge amount of data will be received, and all this data needs to be properly preserved and properly safeguarded. That is the requirement. Now, one of the another this problem which has happened, and which is the this negative outcome of this pandemic scenario, that this because of this last few months severe impact of in economic activity worldwide. Many places it has been observed that resources are becoming more and more scarce, and now the cyber threat using the cyber media to affect economic endeavors. These are becoming more and more prominent. Earlier, we was observing that there was certain this malware threat from Nigeria and other countries like that, and certain East European countries were involved in that in all these activities, negative activities. But right now, from very developed countries also, these activities have started, because this economy is now has been affected very severely. Many people, they lost their jobs. So as there are no jobs, not many economic proposition and options, the people are, this many people, they are either this compelled, or they are this taking up these types of activities in doing all these things. Other words, it was now not the time of pickpockets or snatchers or all this, but this is the time for the cyber hackers or all these, the cyber criminals. So from them, we need to safeguard our individuals. We need to safeguard our banking systems, our financial systems, our country. In many places, what is being, there was a website I was going to read that this they are trying to manipulate the geopolitical scenario by this controlling the social media and all these things, and changing the perception of the people, and manipulating this poll and all these things. So you see, this negative impact is going to be more and more because of this fact. And for encountering this, we need to develop a huge numbers of cyber warriors, and this is one of the requirement. That's why all of the persons who are educated, they should know the importance of cybersecurity and how to use the cybersecurity for their own safety. And at the same time, this is going to be one of these biggest career option. Huge number of people will be required for different, for different organizations, be it public sectors, be it law enforcing agencies, be it different financial sectors, multinational organizations. Almost everywhere we will be requiring huge number of people who can combat all these cyber threats, all this future cyber threats. And for individuals also, there will be the scope of huge numbers of startup and entrepreneurship, because many people, they can act as a freelancer in taking care of all these problems. And that's why this emergence of a new set of professions are going to be there in the next few years, and within the next decades, we'll be seeing these tremendous activities in this particular aspects. Considering the fact this today's webinar is going to be of paramount importance, I believe that all our previous webinars in this regard, data security, network security, cyber security, were stupendous and successful. And I personally came to know about the success of all these webinars from different, my contacts, even at national level also. These are well appreciated, and that's a great thing for us. And even people are now talking about us that we have taken up many cybersecurity programs in the last few months for benefit of huge numbers of learning community. Now, with that trend, and I believe that there will be a significant number of participants for these training programs, for these webinars program, and carefully chosen resource persons for delivering their lectures and sharing their experiences, as it was the practice earlier. That has been repeated again here. I can see Professor Bhavani Thurai Singham, Dr. Sanaurita De, Professor Anupam Joshi, and Professor Elisa Bartino. They joined, and my sincerest thanks to all of them for sparing, as they have consented to spare their valuable times, for sharing their views, sharing their expertise, sharing their knowledge and wisdom with our learning community. As I say in almost all the occasion, now today the time is like that. We need to, make the best use of all the available opportunities. Now, this is one of the silver lining of this pandemic scenario. In a normal time, it would not have been possible to assemble experts from different corners for benefit of our learning community. But as the digital media, this digital platform is now very effective, and we are actively utilizing it from March onwards. So this has become a culture of our university. Might appeal to all the participants, take the maximum benefits of all this discussion and deliberation, develop your own understanding. And if there are something you want to discuss, or you want to clarify, there is discussion forum or discussion forum. That is a unique feature of all this webinar. You can always post your views. You can take opinions from your peer learners. You can take opinions from the resource persons. And we want to make it a sustainable knowledge generation and knowledge gaining process. And there is another option available. This is one of the unique thing at this time. huge amounts of resources, learning resources available at digital platform in terms of massive open online courses, videos, and many things. So you can further supplement, you can further augment, you can further develop whatever you are learning from here. And so there is no lack of opportunities right now. If you are serious enough, then you can learn anything and many things. So this is one of the unique opportunity at this time. Earlier, when we were learners, even people should be learner throughout their life. Even at this stage also we are learning. But still, there were, this when we started our academic journey, that time opportunities are not that. But now this is, I can see this all the we are this emerged in this ocean of opportunities. So we should take this benefit of all these things. My advice to all this learning community who are present over here, all the members of it, kindly take maximum benefit of these webinars. Kindly engage yourself in active learning. One of the problem of this video, this learning through video conferencing is many of the times you are, you have joined, but you are not taking serious interest, but only the, and that is also not, that cannot be tested as the resource persons. They are sitting at a distant part and cannot see you face to face, and many times they cannot understand whether you are taking active interest. What is possible in a standard classroom in a physical mode. This is not a possible situation here. But still, here our responsibility should be to engage ourselves in more active learning, and that's why take a piece of this notebook, take all these notes, make your understanding, develop your opinions. Don't hesitate to ask questions or post queries. And many times I see these questions like this: when I get the certificates, and where is the link for giving my feedback? This is okay, these are standard, but at the same time, where is your this structured question, or the questions from where the resource persons, they can understand you have taken sincere interest in learning all these things. That will give motivation to the this teaching community or resource or these resource persons, because if they can see that you are taking active interest, there also their motivation to express themselves or apply themselves increases. That I know from this from a teacher's perspective. I know if the students are very active, students have serious interest, teachers is motivated. So it is a responsibility to make our these resource persons more motivated to share their knowledge in a better way, or to share their experiences, more experiences with you. So with this, I wish you all the best. I wish this our Department of IT in near future, it will be it will establish itself as a center of excellence. That is our this one of the target in near future, a center of excellence in information technology. I wish you develop a proper network with all these institutes and develop and establish your identity. My sincere, this sincere thanks again to all the resource persons available over here. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Giri,
thank you, sir.
Take this session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable message to the participants. Now our first speaker is Professor Elisa Batino. She is a professor of computer science at Purdue University. I wrote to join the Purdue. She was a professor and department head at the Department of Computer Science and Communication of the University of Milan. She has been visiting research at the IBM Research Laboratory in San Jose at the Microelectronics and Computer Technology Corporation. And she has published more than 70 papers in all major referred journals. Now she is one of the ones in the research crypto research community, and she will speak today security, privacy, and safety in the IoT. So now I request to Professor Batino, the online platform is for you, and you can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll stop my video so there is more bandwidth here.
So I think, Professor Giri, if we all stop our video, it might be better because there'll be more bandwidth. Okay. So I'm going to, yeah.
Okay. So thank you a lot for the invitation. So let's start right away. Okay. What's going on here? Okay, why? Okay. So the Internet of Things has emerged as an important technology. It can be defined as the network of physical objects, called also things, which embed electronic, software, and network connectivities. Because of all those capabilities, basically those objects can be remotely controlled, which means you can remotely control a physical environment. They can, in addition, collect a lot of data. Possibly some data can even now be processed locally, and you can even deploy machine learning models on those devices. So those devices are becoming more autonomous. But in addition, when IoT include also actuators, actuators refers to peripheral in a way, which are able to do action on the physical space, then the IoT becomes a kind of cyber-physical systems. Now, this is very important because basically the fact that those devices can acquire a lot of data requires data privacy and confidentiality, because many of this data can be sensitive. The fact that they be controlled remotely, so a user can remotely control a device, even if the user is not physically there, means that integrity is very important. And the fact that those devices can change the physical space implies that safety is becoming more important, because if an IoT system is compromised by an hacker or a malicious, let's say, party, then the device can execute actions which may harm a human being. For example, think of a case in which a system of IoT devices opens a windows to cool the house, and then there is a small child alone, and this can be very unsafe situation. So in terms of security and IoT devices and systems, because often you have multiple devices working as a system, dramatically expanded the attack surface. And there are various reasons for this. Those systems are very complex. They don't have well-defined perimeters. So if you ask yourself, which is my system, which devices are in my systems, many cases you may not be able to precisely characterize your system. They are highly dynamic, and they may also move. In the future, you will have a lot of robotic devices, which you can think of them as systems of IoT devices, which may move around. And therefore, this increases the dynamicity of your system. So in a way, your system changes all the time. And with systems changing all the time, of course, the task of security becomes much harder. The IoT devices, of course, this is very well known, are kind of very highly heterogeneous, and they may include the physically unprotected portion. So you are not dealing with conventional computer systems, which are in computer facilities, which are usually locked, well protected. Many of them can be in the open air. Okay, so somebody can physically tamper the device, walk away with it. Because of progresses in AI techniques, those IoT systems are becoming autonomous, which means they will learn by themselves. So we will not need to tell them a lot of things, which is nice, but they will control other autonomous systems. So this is, again, is very nice, but also introduce the risks. Now here there are the two major challenges. A lot of IoT systems may include objects not designed to be connected to the internet, because in some cases, if you have a system, especially in industrial IoT environments, some objects which are part of your system were not designed because they were designed many, many years ago, even before the internet, was introduced. They are not able to even defend themselves. They don't have any basic defense techniques. For example, they may not be able to encrypt the data, for example, or verify digital signatures. But they are part of the system. Because especially in manufacturing, you cannot expect to replace all manufacturing equipment with brand new equipment, which now is smart, is able to defend and so forth. And but the other major challenge is that human interaction with all the device is not scalable, because in many cases security problems arise because of mistakes in configurations. For example, you don't set up the proper firewall rules, the proper encryption techniques. You don't, for example, put the correct firewall rules, and that's where you have a breach. Sometimes, you have the techniques, just you are not able to configure them correctly. But unfortunately, with a lot of devices, we cannot expect humans to be able to do this job, even technical people, because devices will outnumber humans on the planet. Perhaps already they have done today so. Okay, and therefore we need here ways to manage the security of those devices, possibly using AI or some automatic way, because otherwise this is going to be a major problem, which again is also a problem that you need to kind of deal with processes as well. And keep in mind that when privacy is brought into the picture, then you have different countries which have different privacy regulations. So you need to make sure that those devices will also comply with those regulations. And in terms of privacy, the human body in the future, by even correct humans, will be one of the major source of data. Okay, so I see there is a question here in the. Can people cannot hear me? I don't know. Can the other people hear me?
Yes, Professor.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Everyone is hearing you.
Sorry, I got a message in a chat. Somebody saying they cannot hear. Okay, sorry. So the human body will collect a lot of data, and of course here there is a lot of privacy that of course we need to assure for those data. Okay, so the question is as follows, though. We have a lot of security techniques, and security has been around for a lot of time. Like Professor Bhavani is one of the pioneers in this area. When I was a student, I was reading her papers. And so people say, we have so many security techniques. Can we apply them to the IoT? I mean, do we need to develop new techniques? Well, yes and no. In a way, some of those techniques, they don't work as they are for IoT. So you need to extend them, engineer, come up with new architecture for security. So in order to give you an idea and also introduce some technical content from my side, I like to reason in terms of security life cycle. And this is a life cycle, the one that we see here, which is a very conventional one. The idea that if you want to have a good security, you need to prepare and prevent, make sure your system is prepared to face any possible attack. You'll do the best, deploy the best technology you have, but attackers are very smart, and it's always difficult to be sure that one system is 100% secure. So you need to monitor your system, looking for signs or potential attacks. Here is where, for example, machine learning techniques can be very useful, because you can come up with anomaly detection systems, which will alert you if there are anomalies. But once you have detected an anomaly, you need to understand what is the cause for the anomaly. Is this an attack? Is, for example, a link, a network link problem? Somebody's jamming your link, your network. Has the IoT device been compromised and so cannot transmit the data? Once you have figured out very quickly, by the way, whether you have a security problem, for example, you have an attack which is ongoing in your system, you have to react rapidly, stop the attack right away. The message here is that it's not a problem. I mean, attacks, they're a fact of life. But it's very important that you are able to react within few seconds or minutes, because then you can do a very good job in stopping the attacker. If you take hours, or even days or months to discover that somebody has compromised your system, then you are in major trouble. Then you will have a lot of damage. So you have to contain the attack in a way. Try to make sure your system can continue working, because for many applications, you cannot stop the system. The system has to be able to work despite the attack. So you have then recover and then do the fix. Then you have to say, okay, let's fix the system. So next time, this attack will not go through. Now, we have done work along the various dimensions. Today, I want to present you two pieces of this work. One is an approach which we can look as belonging to prepare and prevent, which is to say, when we design communication protocols, and here we are focusing on the cellular network protocols, because a lot of IoT devices will communicate increasingly via cellular network, and the 5G cellular protocols and the generation, this new generation, is being designed to support massive IoT systems. So you need to make sure that those protocols don't have any problem, because otherwise, your system will be weak from the beginning. So you need to make sure that when you design them, and those are the standardization organization, the company implementing those protocols into their modems, for example, those implementations don't have vulnerabilities. So there you have to do your best. Then we will look into a system which is in the second category, which is monitoring. How do I monitor this IoT device? Now we came up with two different anomaly detection. One was for networks. This other one, which we will present, it is done for systems. So the anomaly detection system will look at the system calls typically of the IoT devices. But this poses some engineering issues, because IoT devices sometimes don't have the capacity to store machine learning, let's say, tools. So we had to engineer the system using an edge-based architecture. So let's move with the first. So basically, this work looks at how can we find vulnerabilities, which means problems in protocols of cellular networks that can be exploited by attack. Now, we started looking at the previous work which had been done, and what we found is that there is work which, yes, people found some vulnerabilities identified, but there was no systematic approach. And this happens all the time, since a researcher finds a problem, okay? But companies want to know, can I find many of those vulnerabilities? Can I have a methodology that I can follow, that I can find more? Just relying on intuition of an individual, of a single researcher It's not a good strategy. Then other people have analyzed those protocols, but they didn't consider attacks. So they were mainly looking at performance and reliability. So they didn't consider. Then finally, people have done work, but mainly for previous generation. So we came up with this question. Can we build a framework which, by using which one can analyze the cellular network specification to find those vulnerabilities? Now, I explicitly say specification. Our goal was not to analyze the implementation of those protocols. We have done then work with Intel to analyze the implementation. Here we are only looking at the specification of those protocols as they are specified by the standard. So there is the G3PP standard, which is a very big, important standardization body, which standardizes the cellular network protocols. And they produce these standardization documents, which are very huge. So my student who led this work had to study, thousands and thousands of natural language documents to kind of abstract the communication protocols. And text data mining was not working. We tried that, didn't happen. So it was a manual work. But unfortunately, that's the way standards are written. Sometimes they're ambiguous. So sometimes it's not clear what the standard says. So that was our task, okay? Now, we did this work for 4G. We have a new paper which looks in 5G and is much more complex approach there. And usually, just to give you a background, typically we look at the top layer in the network stack. This is called the non-access stratum. So it's something for which is very nice for people in computer science, because here you deal with those software, let's say, with those type of protocols, and which are really more at the functional level of the network. So as you can see, indeed, there are several procedures or functions that are supported for mobile phones, and each such function is implemented by a protocol. So there are a sequence of message exchanges between the phone and the core network, the cellular network. In this work, we analyzed those three: the attach, by which the phone connects to the network initially; the touch, when the phone is disconnect, and then paging. Paging is when the phone, which is usually in a low power mode, which means the phone is sleeping in order to save energy, because this is an important constraint for phone manufacturing. They really need to save energy as much as they can. So this paging will wake up the phone and tell the phone there is a call or an SMS coming for you. We didn't analyze other functions, like, for example, voice over LIT, the handover and so forth, but the same approach can be used. Now, of course, it's very important to mention that in our case, we considered, when analyzing these three functions, this was already a lot of work, actually it took 1 year. We assume that there is an attacker which sits on the network. Basically, this attacker can intercept messages between the phone and the network for various, and then the consequences can be like somebody is charged much more than the person should, or other attacks. Now, I needed to give you a very quick background. I will take just a few seconds. Usually, when looking at the cellular network, you have the tracking area. This is where we move with our phones. This area is divided into sub-areas called the cells. Each cell is controlled by a cell tower. Here, we using the terminology of the standard, this is called the E node B. but I call it a cell tower. Now, keep in mind that with the 5G, we will have a very small cell tower, which will control very small cell. Like you can have a cell tower just on top of your building. The reason is that the areas will become much more dense in terms of presence of devices, because you will have IoT devices everywhere, and therefore you need also this kind of small cell tower. Then you have what we call the core network, called the DPC, but let's say this is the entire cellular network infrastructure, which of course communicate with the internet. So from the phone, you can go to the core network and get on the internet. There are a lot of components internally. Now, we don't need to elaborate on them, but we have two important ones. The HSS is the home subscriber service. They keep all information, including the keys that you have in your SIM card and other information. This is the mobility management entity, is the one in charge of tracking where you are when somebody calls your phone. Today, those MME are very smart. They can do a very good job in tracking you. So typically, they are not going to query the entire tracking area. They have their own strategies. We will abstract all of them and just consider them as a single entity for our analysis, which we call the core network. Now, what is very important also, that this protocol, remember, you have a protocol for each function, and those protocols follow several steps. So those protocols are stateful, which means they go through multiple states. Each state has a memory of the previous state. So let's look briefly to understand, for example, the steps into the attach protocol. This is the very fundamental protocol in which when you switch on your phone will execute. Also, if you move in an area where there is no connectivity, and then you move into an area where there is a connectivity, this attach will be executed. So let's see the three parties which are involved here. There is the UE, which is the phone, the cell tower, and the core network. So initially, the first step would be a connection setup. This is executed between the UE and the eNodeB. This is just a way for the cell tower will send some parameters connecting, the physical connection. Okay, and the phone will get those parameters and so forth. So this is not important. But once the phone, let's say, is physically connected to the eNodeB, then the second step is the phone on its side will send an attach request. This time, this will be sent to the cell tower, but the cell tower will simply forward this request to the core network. This is very important. With this request, the phone will provide the international subscribe identifier and the security capability of the phone. Each phone has a specialized encryption and digital signature algorithms, because we may have different phone generations, because those networks have to support older generations. So we'll send its own security capability to the core network. So far, as you can see, the phone has not been authenticated, okay? But of course, the first step the core network will do. So we'll move to the authentication phase. So we'll send a challenge request to the phone, and we will use of course, challenge type of technique. The phone will respond to the challenge using the secret that the phone has in the SIM card. Of course, an adversary, unless the adversary is able to, get access to the SIM card, will not be able to reply correctly to the challenge. So the core network will then verify that the response is the correct one, will select a specific security algorithm using the security mode command. This will be sent to the phone. The phone will confirm that it has received the selected security algorithm, and will say with the security mode completed. So if everything goes well, the phone has been authenticated, they have agreed on the security algorithm to use, the final step that the core network will do is to accept the attach, tell the phone now you are attached, and as you notice, will allocate a temporary identifier called the TMCI. This has been introduced because sending around the IMCI, this represents a privacy issue, because then somebody can track you, because whenever you move, they can see calls directed to you, because they can see the IMCI in those network messages. So the 4G mandated to replace this initial IMCI with a temporary one, which in theory should be changed very frequently. So if nobody can know which ones is associated with you, because this TMCI will change frequently. Now in practice, network operators don't change them very frequently, that's a problem. But let's assume this is what happened, okay? So this is a typical protocol. Now what I want to mention you that as you can have seen before, we have several phases. So it's very natural to model those protocols using very well-known mechanism called the defined state machine. So what we did, we came up basically with a defined state machine, one representing the protocols from the mobile phone point of view, the other one representing the core network, which we abstract. So this is, and coming up with this defined state machine, that took a lot of work, because then we had to read the standard and coming up with those defined state machine. But in addition to those two, in our model, we include an adversary. So we say we instrument the model with the adversary. And so we end up with a model where we can see we have the model. Now I'll say very shortly what this attacker can do, because we made some assumptions on the attacker capability. Once we get this model, then we just use a conventional model checker. Those are techniques known since, have been invented, I don't know, 30 years ago. And basically what they'll do is the following. You give such a checker a model expressed in our case as this defined state machine diagrams, and you give some properties. So we have extracted the properties from the standard, and then the model checker will verify whether your model verifies the property. If it verifies the property, okay, everything is good. If not, it will give you a counter example. This is a sequence of steps in your model which will lead to the violation of the property. For us, this can be a potential attack, but we must mention that in some cases, certain attacks are only possible if the attacker has certain capabilities, okay? So that depends on the capabilities that you assume for the attacker. So in our case, we assume certain capabilities. So we need to verify through a cryptographic protocol verifier whether, given the capability of the attacker, this attack can really happen. Because in some cases, if for the attacker to succeed, you have to assume that the attacker knows the secret key in the SIM card, and suppose instead in your attack model you don't have this attack, let's say, capability, then your attack will not succeed given the attacker assumption. Finally, we run, so the ones which pass also, which are identified as attacks after the second step, we run them through a test bed, which means we build a small test bed to make sure that the attacker is indeed possible. So I want to skip, but what I want to say that in our finite state machine model, we only deal with propositional logic level. So we abstract a lot. We only deal with message types, and we abstract away cryptographic construct. So we have a condition like if the MAC verification fails, true or false. We don't deal on how the MAC verification is implemented inside. Okay, and this is so this is our attacker model. Now we deal with what we call the what is known as Dole-Viao attacker. So the attacker basically sits on the network, and what can do can, for example, drop a message. So make sure this message never reaches the, for example, the core network. The other possibility is that the attacker just send a detach request, injects a false message, which was not sent by the phone. Okay. Or can try, so, or can let the message go. So basically, those are the property. And here you can see a very simple example of how we model this is the finite state machine for the attach protocols. As you can see, the phone goes through several states, and depending on the condition, the phone, for example, as you notice, each edge is labeled by an expression which has the condition. If the conditions are true, the state change, the state transition will be executed, and a certain action will be executed. And so, of course, we came with all those diagrams for the other actions. So, for example, a nice property that we want to have is that once the UE waits for the authentication request, at the end, eventually will authenticate the network, okay? Because also the phone has to authenticate the network. So that's what we want to have. And basically, by running this model, we can find the cases by which when the phone is here, so eventually should get to this final state, will never get here. And we want to see cases when this may happen. When the phone, for example, receives for example, a mobile restart request, by which the phone will be asked to restart, which is very strange to receive this message here. But the question is, can the attacker inject such a message? That's what we needed to find out. Okay, so this is a typical example. So the phone, is doing this attach request. For example, it is in the States, and receives a request, a message, authentication reject. Now, if so, the question, we want to make sure that this cannot come from an attacker, should only come from the core network, okay? Because this is the one who can really authenticate the phone. So that's our test bed that we can skip. So by using our techniques, we uncovered 10 new attacks, and we found which procedure was this attack responsible. In many cases, as you can see, the problem is in the standard. The standard, that we found the mistakes in the standard. In some cases, the responsibility is the cellular net, the companies, the carriers like Verizon, T-Mobile. In some cases, is even the smartphone. The implementation of the standard in the phone led to this problem. Okay. Now, if you ask me which are the reasons, and then we discovered that basically we show that previous attacks can be uncovered. Now, if you ask me which are the reasons why we have, which are those mistakes, they are actually, to my surprises, are very simple things, like in some cases, some messages are not digitally signed. This was a big surprise. And this is the case of certain broadcast messages sent by the cellular base station. They broadcast very frequently, like every 20 milliseconds, certain messages but those messages are not digitally signed. So it's very easy for a fake base station to attract cellular phones to connect to the fake base station. In some cases, there is no verification on the digital signature of some messages. Typically, if I remember well, is the detach message. And finally, some messages are not reply protected. Okay, so those were really problems in the standard. So this work, everyone had got a lot of visibility because it's a more systematic approach. Now, I'll try to go quick so I can finish in 10 minutes, so to give room to the other speaker. We started a little bit late, so it's not my fault. So I want to just mention you the other piece of our work, which is an anomaly detection system, an intrusion for IoT device. So here we follow the conventional approach. We want to monitor the processes or running on the IoT devices. We want to build a profile, which for IoT devices works very well because those have a very limited or well-defined functionalities. And then we monitor them to see when there are anomalies. So, but we had a lot of challenges in doing this. First of all, in many cases, for various reasons, you cannot do the learning on the devices themselves. It's very expensive. And you cannot run a machine learning algorithm on the device. So both learning and anomaly detection have to be run somewhere else. So we came up with the edge architecture. So we have two pieces here. We have a small server, which can be really a small machine, like even a laptop running on the edge. And then you have a small component, very minimal, running on the device itself. And so we call this the split architecture. And the IoT devices specifically only has to install, so we need to install on it a small software which will do logging, because it has to record the data from the device in order to see if those data show any sign of an anomaly. So those data will be sent to the edge server, and then the edge server will do the detection, right? But the question is, how can we trust that the infected devices will not tamper with the logs? Because the attacker may as well change the log, so the log do not report any anomaly. Now, we tried our system with almost 4,000 samples of malware, and those malware are not so smart to look for, whether there is a logger on the device. But in theory, you can have. So we came up with a technique which we call don't give the attacker time. I used a very well-known hash chain verifier that it is, it's been proposed many years. It's a kind of fundamental technique in security. Now, the other problem was how big are those logs? Because basically, logs may have, they may collect a lot of data. So we came up with 3 different types of logs. Each log will collect more data than the previous one. So you can decide to collect very few data. Of course, the anomaly detection won't be very precise, or you can collect a lot of data and your anomaly detection will be very precise. So that's our architecture. As you can see, we have 3 different types of logs. Now, for sake of time, I don't elaborate a lot, but you can see we have this small component on the device itself. Here we have the system which sits on the edge server, which does the learning, the actual, the anomaly detection at runtime. We have 3 layers of these 3 layers of logging. The least expensive only collect the names of the running processes. So this is the very inexpensive. You may have 10 processes running on those devices. So it's very minimal information. And those are the regular processes. Okay, then you can monitor the behavior of each running process and collect a lot of metrics. like CPU consumption, then you monitor the system calls. This is the largest log. And as you can see, we collect for each system call. So we collect how many basically these system calls were issued within a given time. So, and when you do this, you have extremely high precision. So this is our hash channel verifier. I have to skip, but I can. We have a paper led by my student Anand Mujarigar and our colleague from HP. So we did an implementation, and basically we used, as you can see, a data set with almost 4,000 malware samples. And we wanted to look at which of those three logs have a better accuracy. Of course, the log, which only collect the process name and process ID, has about 79% detection rate, which means it may miss some malware. The one which collects metrics like CPU is quite good, but it has some false positive, because when you collect things like CPU usage, some benign processes are incorrectly labeled as malicious. Probably they change their behavior a bit. With the one where we collect the number of calls, we get 100% rate. This is our test bed, and this is, we can skip here. I want to show that basically collecting data about the number of calls really is it gives you the best accuracy. So I can show you here, you can see the data. And you can see that the malicious processes, they have a very different behavior in terms of system calls. For example, the connect, we notice that on the average, malicious processes have 10 calls by the unit of time, of course, while the benign process only one. So as you can see, there is a huge difference in those metrics. That's why using them, you can identify them correctly. Now remember, those IoT devices are quite systematic. If their behavior were to change a lot, this approach may not work as it is. We needed to have a major extension. Finally, and this I'm going to conclude my talk soon. So I want to point out to a very new exciting area, which has to do with the safety a lot. And this is the following, is really motivated by the following reason. In AI, there are a lot of techniques, and one in particular, I found it very interesting to me is the technique known as reinforcement learning. I mean, this has been around for a long time, but now because of progresses, it's becoming more effective. And the idea is very simple: is a way to learn. So the idea would be that a device can try actions in dynamic environment and basically learn from the result of these actions. And basically, I like it a lot because it is a way to make our IoT system more autonomous, because now they can learn on their own, they can easily adapt. Okay, so it's very nice. And what you need to do, and in many cases, you do not require a lot of data. You just need a dynamic environment where this can be actually simulated, in some cases, environment where the device can try action, and a reward function. This reward function will tell the device which is the gain that the device will have in terms of a certain metrics. Okay, so the device can try an action and see that the reward is very small, then can try another action and therefore can see that the reward is much higher, and then can decide to favor the second action because this gives a better reward. Now things is more complicated because in many cases you have to look at a sequence of actions, because a single action may give you a very high reward, but combined with other action, the overall quality will be low. Okay. Now, those reward functions have to be measured in some way. So things can be like, for example, the energy consumption for a certain actions. Okay, so from the engineering point of view, you have to have all the ways by which those devices can, kind of get the value of those reward functions. But what is the problem here? Notice that this is very nice, but if a device is left on its own, it may do actions which can be dangerous, which may lead to unsafe situations. For example, suppose you have a system of devices in charge of cooling our house, and they can open a window, activate the air conditioning, do other things. And they may say, oh, there is a wind outside, let's open the window, because this will basically reduce the cost of energy. And we take advantage of the wind outside, but this of course is very unsafe. If nobody is in the house, or again there is a child, you don't want to do this. So of course, if the device were left to learn on their own, this may be dangerous. And in any case, you can train them in advance, but still you don't know what the real environment will be. So I posed this question to I have a very good student, Anand Mujjerikar, and I told him, we really needed to address this problem of safety. And also, so we came up with so there are many issues here that sometimes understanding what the user wants is not easy. And a major problem was how do we constrain those devices? So we came up with an approach which is very initial, using security and safety policies. Okay, we can skip this. But basically, we came up with an approach where we have, in addition to the conventional, let's say, reinforcement learning architecture, as this additional module, the security policy learner. So this module is in charge of learning those policies, and whenever the device tries to do an exploration, to explore a new action, this policy filter will evaluate whether this action is a safe action. If not, of course, will block this action. Okay. What is very interesting, the capability of our system is not only to block action, but in some cases, you may allow an unsafe action as long as this unsafe action is combined with a safe action, which will mitigate the unsafety of the first action. So it's also able to add more action to the initial action. So we can skip, and here is examples of, for example, additional. So for example, we start with an initial action, which is unsafe, and our device is able to add an additional action, A2, which will make the entire sequence safe. So, and okay, we can skip, but this is an interesting direction. It will be very useful because we want to take advantage of AI techniques for our IoT devices, but also we want to make sure that those techniques are safely used and do not lead to unsafe situations. So this is again initial work, and there are a lot of issues to be investigated in our, safe reinforcement learning techniques. But I would like to mention that we are not the only one. A lot of people in AI are worrying how to constrain, for example, reinforcement learning or other machine learning techniques to take ethics into account. Okay, you want that those AI follow some ethics. They are ethicals, whatever ethics means for different culture, and they are trying to understand exactly how to do that. Okay, so we look more at the security and safety. So that's an important issue in any case. So I want to mention a few research directions. How to protect IoT devices from cyber-physical attacks. People have shown that you can manipulate the physical environment. For example, you can have certain specific sound frequencies which may block some microelectronic mechanical systems inside of devices and block the devices. So how do you protect from those? How to protect them from ransomware? And again, safety of IoT system. I just give you an initial idea, but there is a lot of work. And how to exploit edge enabled for IoT security. We only have used the edge architecture for anomaly detection, but for security, you have a lot of other functions. And therefore, the edge may help a lot. So I have done a stop share. So if you have questions.
Professor Giri, there are many questions on the question and answers. So yeah.
Let's see if I can.
Just you can answer because you see other will delay. So you can, but you know, if possible, you can give the few answer.
Yeah,
because
okay.
you are already in delay. Yeah, and they can contact you.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay, yes. So now there is a question which looks very good and says that from the point of view of cyber forensics, so if any attack observes, what kind of forensics artifact can be found? The question is not very clear, okay, but for sure, when you have an attack, you need exactly to find out whether there is a malware in your system, okay? And so you will need to run forensics in real time, though, because a lot of forensics is a post fact. So which means once I have an attack, after a month, I call a company which will do a forensics analysis. Here we needed to do in real time. So you can, for example, do right away a security scan. So you can scan your entire system. You can do attestation of the software and so forth. Those are, but this is an important question. Keep in mind that for forensics, we deal here with things which change rapidly. It's not a static system. It's not that you say, oh, I have my big machine, my big, let's say, computing center where I have 100 machines, I got an attack. Okay. There things don't change. I mean, you have this 100 machine and those are 100 machines. Here you may have hundreds, thousands of devices and they may have gone by the time you want to do your analysis. So that's why here it's more challenging. Now, another question is, which is the best protocol for all kinds of computation? I don't know exactly what you mean for all kinds of computation, perhaps for communication. Now, for communication, the 5G and the technology will support a lot of communication capabilities. Already our phones can communicate via Bluetooth, they can communicate via the cellular network, they can communicate via Wi-Fi, and the same probably the IoT devices will be able to do. Not, of course, the small ones, but the richest one may be able to do that. This will pose questions on its own. We found that in the mobile phones, the broadband processor processes both the cellular network protocols and the Bluetooth protocol. So we were able to show an attack in which we inject some malicious command through the Bluetooth interface, and this command will detach the phone from the cellular network. Okay. The other question is which device will check the model in model checker? We are not checking devices. We are checking abstraction of protocols implemented by devices. Okay. So remember, a protocol is an abstract protocol, but then it is implemented by some code, because at the end you have to implement the protocols. And therefore, what we analyze is the models of those protocols, not the device itself, okay? Modeling an entire device would be very complex, and nobody would model an entire device because, you know, I mean, you would model the CPU of the device. I mean, usually people only model protocols implemented into the device. Now, which kind of authentication technique has been used? There, people are coming up with a lot of very efficient techniques, but that really depends a lot on the IoT devices. For example, 10 years ago, we worked on certificate-less encryption techniques for IoT devices. For cellular networks, usually we are looking at, for example, very efficient techniques for the authentication of broadcast messages sent by the cell towers, because there you have a very stringent requirement, like you have to have the verification and the signatures must be done below the milliseconds. You have to do in, for example, 0.02 milliseconds. The signature has to be incredibly small. So there we proposed an approach which uses Schnorr signatures. It is a hierarchical approach for meeting architecture of the core networks. So there is no unique technique, okay? And of course, with the quantum, there will be the problem of using post-quantum cryptographic techniques. In cellular networks, you have a lot of issues. Okay.
Professor Batino,
Yeah.
so there are many questions. So, so participants can send the mail and you can give the answer, because we are having the other speakers.
Yes, sure, sure. Yeah,
so participants.
Yeah.
So thank you, Professor Batino, for your valuable speech. And, it is very informative. I think it will be helpful to our research community as well as, and our students. So you have
thank you a lot, and you have a lot of very good questions. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much. You see, you have shared your so hello.
Yes, sir. Please.
Hello. Are you getting my voice?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Professor Anupam Joshi. Hello.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I will share my screen.
And you see, you told Sarinita will say something for the students, or will start?
Yes, I am delighted to give a couple of minutes to my colleague Sanorita, Dr. Sanorita, who has just joined our department, as I said, as a new assistant professor, and is doing very interesting work in the area that the Honorable Vice Chancellor has mentioned, which is the use of social media to influence narratives and persuade people. Sanorita, do you want to spend a minute or two, and then I can start my talk?
Sure. I can share a couple of my slides.
Sure, go ahead. I'll stop my presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anupam. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizing committee for allowing me to present myself and my research. So I joined UMBC as an assistant professor this August, and I did my PhD from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign this summer. And before that, I did my undergrad from IIEST, formerly known as Shibpur B College. So my primary research interest is in social computing, crowd computing, and building intelligent socio-technical systems. So let me start today with this term, social platforms. So when I say this term, what are the things that come into our mind? Probably Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and so on, right? So some of these platforms are helping us to communicate with our friends and social ties. Some of them are helping us to share our thoughts through videos, and some of them are even helping us to get jobs, right? So it seems like a happy picture where everyone is trying to work for the betterment of the society. But is it? Perhaps not. In these pictures actually may tell us a completely different story, because this was the first time when lawmakers in the USA put serious concerns in terms of the role of social platforms in meddling election results. And because of that, CEOs of most of the major social platforms had to appear before the US Congress to discuss about the potential risk of mass manipulation through their platforms. And not only in US, suddenly this was happening all over the world. For example, in UK, Cambridge Analytica was accused for targeting specific voters with pro-Brexit messages that helped political groups in favor of Brexit. In France, social platforms are used to leak politically motivated documents. In India, which is the largest democracy in the world, they're allegedly WhatsApp meddled with the election by spreading tailored news. And even during this current pandemic situation, social platforms not only contributed as platforms for collaboration and support, but also at the same time, they have become a major source for spreading misinformation, disinformation, and political agendas. So in my research, what I try to do is I try to build socio-technical systems by investigating the impacts of complex social platforms on public opinion and mass behavior. And for doing that, I can incorporate human factors into my designs. I include social platforms in my designs. And of course, I apply learning algorithms to include valuable insights into the whole process. So if you're interested about my work, if you want to know more about my work, please feel free to contact me. And also, I'm looking for prospective new PhD students who can join me in my lab at UMBC. So if you're interested to pursue a PhD career, please do not hesitate to contact me. With that, that's all from me today. Thank you everyone. Thanks, Anupam, you can take over.
Thank you, Sanarita. And so if you stop your presentation, I'll start mine.
Just I introduce Professor Joshi. Anupam Joshi is the Orosz Family Professor and Chair of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering Department at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, USA. He is the Director of UMBC Center for Cybersecurity. He is the Fellow of IEEE. Dr. Joshi obtained his BTech degree from the IIT Delhi in 1989. He has published more than 270 technical papers, and he has having that 9 patents. So now I request to Professor Joshi to continue your presentation.
Thank you so much, Professor Giri, for inviting me. And it's a delight to see over 100 people in the Tech program join our discussion today and hear from my very distinguished colleagues, Professor Elisa Bertino and Professor Bhavani. As Professor Bertino said, she as a graduate student read Professor Bhavani's paper, while I as a graduate student read both of their papers. So
nice.
It's a delight to be here with them today. And I'm going to focus on AI and cybersecurity. And I think most of my talk will be on how to use AI for cybersecurity, although if I do get a few minutes at the end, I might just touch upon some problems that AI is creating in security. But what we are trying to do is to push the state of the art in defense, right? So here is a way to think about it. Imagine you are a big company, right? IBM or something like that in India. You can, Google, you can probably afford to pay extremely high salaries to a few extremely good individuals who can man your security operations center and detect complex threats. For example, advanced persistent threats. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, right? Or newly published attacks, so-called zero-day attacks. But your typical organization is not able to do it. And especially in the Indian context, if you think how much sensitive information lies with the government, and many of you are faculty in government institutions, so you know what the government pay scales in India are like compared to private sector. It is sometimes hard to attract the best talent to go there. And so the question is, can AI help? Can AI help the average security analyst be as good as the best security analyst? That's sort of this big idea, because most of the defense today in modern SOCs is by doing something called watch standing. It's a term borrowed from the Navy, where you basically, remember in the ships, there used to be this crow's nest and a person would go up and look out to see what threats might be there. Same kind of idea. You're staring at a bunch of monitors, looking at data flow by and saying, oh, this looks like an attack, right? So some people can do it better than others. And the question is, can AI help? Because attackers are extremely smart. I'll give you a very simple example. In 2016, there was a ransomware called Petya, which, if you look at the chain, it used email-based phishing to get people to click on the link. If you clicked on the link, it would override the master boot record, force the reboot on your machine, and then encrypt your file system. Well, a year later, what happens was there was a group called Shadow Brokers that released a tool called Eternal Blue that exploited vulnerabilities in Microsoft's Windows file management, remote file management system called SMB. And what did the attackers do? They took essentially the same malware. Look at this here, right? The last 3 steps here. And they basically just changed this, the Eternal Blue, from email phishing. And now you had a new attack, right? Which signature-based systems would not detect. And APTs are particularly interesting because they are extremely long-lived. So if you look at this particular approach, this is an North Korean actor labeled APT-37. You can see that the attacks basically started in 2015 and continued through 2018, and they used a variety of the CVE number. For those of you who are not familiar, describes a specific vulnerability. So for example, CVE-2015-2387 is the attack number 2387, which was first reported in 2015, right? So it's just that different attacks. So you can see how many different attacks they are using. And in some cases, they are using attacks before they are actually even known. So I will give you a more specific example of this. This is from the US, but in a minute, I will tell you about similar things that have been done in India, against India. And this is relatively old. As you can see, this is back from an APT that was started tracking in January 2010 and was tracked for 2 years. And what happened was there is this very big aerospace company called Lockheed Martin in the United States. They make planes and missiles and things like that. And 5 of their distinguished scientists that worked in the aeronautics and astronautics division got an email saying they had been recommended for the best scientist or something like that, some best scientist type award by this organization. And that email came from that organization's email address. And there was a PDF form. It said, like, please, fill out this form and submit your CV because you have been nominated for this prestigious award. Now, these were extremely smart people. So they said, what is the probability that 5 of us working in the same organization have been selected for this award. That's a very low probability. This must be a fake message. So they went to their IT team. And the IT team looked at this and said, okay, we'll take you to a honeypot system where we can track the intruder, where you don't have any sensitive information, and then you click on the link. Now notice that this adversary, once they clicked the link, was tracked for 2 years. The adversary continued to stay in their system and try to extract information out of their system. And again, if you look at these CVE numbers, you're seeing that the adversary is constantly using new CVEs. And in this case, the interesting thing was that over the course of this 40 years, the adversary used 40 0 days, right? What that means is they used 40 new attacks that at the time they used the attack were not even known to the security community. So these numbers were given post facto, after the fact. So that's why it's sort of interesting and important to note that your adversary is extremely motivated, especially in the state actor scenario. Your adversary is extremely motivated. They're patriotic people working for their country against you, right? So it's their job. And the tools they actually use, what are called implants here, are still classified. So no one knows what they actually use because they were so new. But they use custom new tools to sort of get into your system and then extract information. So you can see, for those of you who are familiar in the security domain, thank you for those that are raising your hands. I would appreciate if you can type the question in the Q&A box, and then towards the end, I will try to answer all of these questions. So what you're seeing at the bottom is what's called the cybersecurity kill chain, which is how a typical advanced attacks works. First, they figure out, something about your organization. Then they figure out. So let me give you a simple example. I will not name the organizations. This happened in India. An email went to a very, very senior scientist, scientist G rank, from their boss with a PDF attachment saying, I need your comments on this immediately, right? And the only reason that scientist G didn't click on that email is because she told me, sir, I had just come with a meeting from my boss. So I thought, if my boss didn't tell me in person, why has he sent me an email during the meeting asking for my comments urgently? So they figured out that this was an attack, and then they looked at their systems, and sure enough it was. But notice how notice how much of reconnaissance was done, because people actually knew where this scientist was in the hierarchy, who were their boss. Another example, again, I will not name the organizations concerned in India. This was a malware. I will not suggest who created this malware, but it might give you a hint that this same malware was used against Japan, India, Vietnam, and Malaysia. So you can guess who might have created such malwares. But in India, the mail went with the right tender and contract number from a scientific organization in India to a shipbuilding facility in India that said, there is a change in the material specification that we want you to build the hull of the ship out of, and here are the new specifications, right? So notice the precision of targeting, right? They knew the tender number, they knew the contract number, they knew who the scientists were on this side, they knew what shipyard was building. So you can see how much recon and intelligence goes into crafting these attacks. It's just to give you a sense of where things are. So the problem with our attack, with our defense sort of right now is, think about a batsman that is looking at the wickets. And when the ball crosses the batsman, then they try to use the bat to swat away the ball somehow. Now, if any of you have played cricket or even watched cricket, you know that that's not how batsmen play. That's a particularly poor way to defend your wickets. because you are seeing the attack only once it has begun to unfold. But think about our network systems today. What do? We put some kind of edge filter or router, IDS, IPS, or firewall at the edge of our network. So we are telling the adversary, you attack, and then we will look at the network data and say, oh, an attack is happening, right? So where do we want to go with AI? So the idea is that if you're a good batsman, right, you see various things. You see whether the bowler, rub the ball on on his forehead to give it more moisture, or they rubbed it on their uniform to to deplete the moisture on the ball, because that changes the flight dynamics of the ball. If the fielding arrangement was changed or not, whether a square leg has been moved fine or the second slip has been added. You notice whether the bowler is taking extra steps in their run up. You notice whether the bowler is going around the wicket or over the, so you notice these things in your adversary because they give you hints of the kind of attacks that might happen, and you change your defensive posture appropriately. So long term, I'm not saying we have solved this problem. I'm just saying long term, that's the kind of goal that the AI systems enable you to get towards, namely that you can anticipate attacks and be ready to defend against them before they are attacked. So what are we doing specifically? And I want to acknowledge funding from IBM Research and the US Department of Defense in doing this work. What we're trying to do is to sort of build a system that can take a variety of data from traditional sensors that those of you in the security community may be familiar with, which is sort of network-based sensors, host-based sensors, and things like that. But also things you may not be familiar about, that you may not think about as security sensors. So we read new CVE vulnerability descriptions. We read blogs. We read Reddit forums about security. We even read the dark web, where people are discussing potential future attacks, or people post things like dark web, like I have found a new attack in Windows, whatever. Who's willing to pay me, and how much are you willing to pay me? So people post things like that. But if I can read that piece of text and understand it and make a computer understand it, then I can actually be prepared for that attack before that happens. So we extract information from textual sources and reason over the resulting knowledge. So that's the AI part that I will go into some greater detail today, so that we can detect the possible intrusions that are missed by sort of standard defensive systems. And there are all kinds of issues. You see this little picture of the power chip. That's because if you're doing this level of sort of logic processing, you need a lot of processing horsepower to do it in software real time. And our tool of choice is representing all of this knowledge in something called an ontology. Those of you from the AI domain may be familiar with this term. If you are not, what an ontology is, this is a term that comes from philosophy into AI. Ontology is merely a description of all the entities in your world and the relationship between them. So you could have an ontology saying, there are people called faculty, and there are people called students, and there is a relationship between them saying faculty teach students. But within faculty, you can say there are professors and associate professors and assistant professors and lecturers, and they are all a type of faculty. And then faculty are employees, but there are other kinds of employees in a university called staff, et cetera, et cetera. So you see what I'm talking about. So this is a way of capturing the knowledge about the world in a way that you can formally reason over it. You can apply logic and reason over it. So our system is called the Unified Cybersecurity Ontology. I'm just going to flash this slide and tell you that you can go Google this up and read the papers. And what it does is, in the security community, there is a threat exchange format called STIX, and so do we capture everything that STIX does. So STIX says things like there are adversaries who run attack campaigns. They use certain tool technologies and practices, and for a specific tool, there is an indicator of the attack, which you can observe, and then there are mitigations of that attack, and people are targeted by that attack, et cetera, et cetera. So we capture this kind of knowledge. So what are we doing? We're detecting potential new vulnerabilities from blogs, tweets, dark web discussions, discussion forums, et cetera, and mapping it to our ontology, the cybersecurity knowledge graph. that we represent as UCO. We recognize the context of the system and potential attacks and intrusions in data from low-level sense systems. And then we integrate and sort of reason over these two things to detect an attack. So what does that mean? I'll start with what's called deductive reasoning, right? So a smart analyst, one of the reasons that some analysts are better than others is that they have been an analyst for a long time. They understand certain kinds of attacks. They have read a lot about attacks. They keep, sort of themselves appraised of what's going on in the world. So in these kinds of situations, they have a lot of background knowledge. For example, a smart person may know that new vulnerabilities have been discovered in the software. They might know that, the way Airtel or Jio assign addresses to people's home networks is different from how they assign addresses to organizations. And so, and they might sort of know as background knowledge that one of the first things that attackers do is that they will try to take over, some random person's machine in their home and then use that to attack the system. So they will not directly attack, they will take over your machine. And if you look at, a country like India or the US, the average person is probably not running a lot of security software on their home machine. So I will take over their machines. They are lightly defended. And then I will use that machine to attack someone. And that way, even if the attack is discovered, I'm not discovered. And I can actually build a chain like this. I can take over one machine, have that take over a second machine, have that take over a third machine, and then attack. There are observed state of the systems, what software is installed, what processes normally run in my system, how much memory do they normally consume, what kind of network connections do I see, what are the traffic statistics. I see a lot of traffic normally going out between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., but less traffic going on, et cetera, et cetera. And there are organizational policies, right? So in some companies or some government organizations, if you have to travel, then you can't book the travel yourself. There is an office that does it. So there should be no reason for a travel agency to be contacting you directly. One of the common scams in India today is they will call you up. I don't know if some of you have received their call. I started receiving those calls a few years after my father passed away. And they would say that, can I talk to Mr. Joshi? They didn't mean me, they meant my father. And then they would say, and I would say no. So they would say, well, he has an LIC policy that he hasn't claimed and it has been matured and blah, 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 blah. And, they get you to reveal information, and in the computer context, they get you to click on a link, and that's all they really need to do. So the idea is, can you form rules like the one I'm showing you here, right? Each of these individual facts, and person getting an email from a travel agency with an attachment, a process running with that person's PID, a particular software having vulnerabilities, that software connecting to a particular IP address, all of these are, potentially okay things. But if you look at them in totality, you will say something is wrong here. This chain of events should not happen. And that's where a smart analyst is extremely good. And that's where computer AI-based systems can begin to replicate what a smart analyst does. Let me skip this. Deduction is not the only kind of reasoning. You could actually do abductive and inductive reasoning. Those tend to be harder to maintain. So the question is, how do you acquire this knowledge? How do you represent this knowledge? How do you ingest sense data? Looking at, there was a ransomware called WannaCry in sort of 2018 timeframe that was extremely, it spread, it attacked a lot of hospital systems and shut them down. But this is the kind of thing where you might read a blog post saying, what does WannaCry do? This is the second bullet represents the kind of thing that a good analyst knows. A good analyst knows that, ransomware, no matter what they do, their job is to modify, encrypt your sensitive files, They will have to download the encryption key from the command and control server of that malware. So they know these facts. And then you could be actually sensing in your file system to see whether you detect any malformed SMB packets, whether you detect a certain network download activity from an IP address that you have never connected to, whether you see sensitive files in your master boot record getting changed, which normally shouldn't be changed. And so the idea is, if based on this knowledge that you acquire, based on your own experience, and based on what's actually happening on your machine, you could say, yeah, something is, a computer could say something bad is happening. So we built such a system. I'm going to skip the details of the building, but we actually demonstrated this. As I said, this work was funded by IBM and DoD. So we demonstrated this system we built. By actually, so obviously we didn't want to use the real ransomware, because if we use the real ransomware, it would actually begin to spread on our network. So we sort of recreated a new ransomware that did the same things, but didn't actually spread. So it's, the sequence of actions it took didn't change. And this was built by a former student, Sandeep, who now works for Cisco's security unit. So we built such a system, and I'm not going to, unfortunately, it's hard to show a live demo like this, but we built this kind of a system. So what I want to focus today for the remaining part of my talk is to talk about how do you extract knowledge from text. And earlier, Dr. Chanchal Patra had asked about NLP. So Dr. Patra, you'll see NLP being discussed now. So the idea is we want to be able to, in text, find entities and their properties, their relations and event. We want to represent them, as I said, in sort of a knowledge base. Ours is called UCO. And we want to link these to external background knowledge bases, right? So recently in India, there is this question on whether software that comes from China should be allowed to run on certain sensitive platforms. And, your text might just say that there is a vulnerability in PUBG, but then if you use background knowledge bases like Wikipedia, which is now represented as an ontology in Wikidata. So if you can use Wikidata and say, oh, I know that PUBG is controlled by a Chinese company, so now that's giving me more information. This is the kind of open sources we use, Reddit blogs, cert things, Talos is Cisco's report system. We also use IBM's threat reporting system. We take the structured feeds from various TIX feeds that come out. This is the kind of text that you want to read and say, oh, this text is telling me that this protocol in this operating system, has a vulnerability that permits remote attackers to execute arbitrary code. Right? So you want to be able to read this text and have a computer understand it. We are very good as humans at understanding this, but we want a computer to do it so that the computer can look at, millions, billions of such texts that are floating around and acquire knowledge that can be helpful to the analyst. And what you want to do is to then capture this knowledge to say things like, well, there's something called the Adobe Flash Player. The Adobe Flash Player is used by Google Chrome. It's used by Edge. It's used by Safari. Safari is built by Apple. Edge is built by Microsoft. Adobe Flash Player has the SpiderMonkey engine. The SpiderMonkey engine can be embedded in an iframe. The SpiderMonkey engine has a remote JavaScript execution vulnerability, there is a hacker group called Replayer that's using this vulnerability by embedding them into an iframe, and this is what it does. And here is how you can, so, there are these kinds of relationships that you can see popping up that I was just verbally describing to you. So you want to build this because it tells you what the attacks are, but it also tells you how to defend against them. So, and you want to construct this by reading text that is available to you, right? So here's an example. And I apologize, I should have taken out. This is the logo of the sponsoring organization, a part of the Department of Defense. I apologize, I should have taken that out. And I don't know why this slide got messed up but what this says is attack. So this is actually a piece of text. It's from something called after action reports. And for those of you who are from the security community, you know that, but if you're not, the idea is that when an attack happens, experts are called in, someone asks a question about forensics, so they do sort of these forensic analyses, and then they publish like long reports. They run into pages that document exactly what happened and how it happened. And the challenge we got from DoD was that right now, a security analyst might have to read thousands of such reports, every month, which each run into hundreds of pages. And how are they supposed to keep up? So they were saying, can you get a computer to read that and use NLP to represent that knowledge so that the analyst can directly query that knowledge rather than having to read that report and get that knowledge. So, again, you can see that there's a particular hacker group. It uses a certain technique, which uses a certain vulnerability, etc. And you can see that they use email as a dropping mechanism. So this is the system that we've built. As you can see, there are two key components. One is called an NER, a named entity extractor, a named entity recognizer. And what that does is that it will read a sentence. For example, if I give you a sentence saying, Debashish Giri is a professor at West Bengal University of Technology, right? So it will say, oh, Debashish Giri is a named entity. Professor is a named entity, right? And West Bengal University of Technology, Maulana Abul Kazam Azad University of Technology. These are entities. And then there is a relationship extractor, which extracts the relationships between the entities you find. So it says, oh, Professor Debashish Giri, West Bengal University of Technology, the relationship is faculty in, right? So Professor Debashish Giri is faculty in West Bengal University of Technology. So that's what you want to do. And that's the tool we are building. We started by doing this on Twitter. My former student, Sudeep Mittal, read this effort, and Sudeep is now a faculty member at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Sudeep came to us from IIIT Delhi. The earlier work I described to you was my student Sandeep Narayanan. Sandeep, as I said, is now working for Cisco's security division, but he came to me from NIT Surathkal. So you can read tweets, and this was a tweet about a vulnerability in ASUS wireless router, and you can say, where did you read that tweet? So that's sort of the identification of the tweet. When did this tweet come through? And it says that this tweet indicates that something has a vulnerability. And so what has a vulnerability? The ASUS wireless router. And what is the consequence of that vulnerability? It's the person in the middle attack. And you can see that we are using our ontology, UCO, but we are also using other publicly available ontologies like Yago. So if you are in the sort of the semantic web world with ontologies, you don't have to rebuild everything. There are lots of good if you're starting work in the security area using ontologies, you can start with using UCO. It's all in the public domain, right? You can start with Wikidata for background knowledge. So you might say, why can't we use, there are lots of NLP toolkits. I can go to Stanford Core NLP's website, download their toolkit and just start. What's the problem? The problem is if you give a sentence like this, all the Stanford NER system will recognize is something called login service, and it calls it an organization, which is completely wrong. What you really want, what we've built, is that we identify that remote login service is a product. 1.0.0 is a version of that product. Not clearing account information is a weakness, and the users are target, etc. So we are able to get much better information by our own system. Now the question that arises is, as I said, you are reading thousands of reports, maybe, right, every month. And if you just treat each report as an individual entity and extract knowledge from it, that itself is useful. But often what will happen is that the same vulnerability will be used to attack multiple organizations. Each organization someone will call Mandiant, right? Someone will call McAfee. Someone will call third organization. So there'll be like 4 or 5 different organizations that are attacked by the same method, and they will each at slightly different points of time call different forensics organizations to do their analysis, and each of them will publish a report. So what would be really nice is if you could recognize and say, oh, you're talking about this malware, that other report is also talking about the same malware. Let me fuse. Some of the things you will be saying is in common, but there may be slightly different things in each report that if I could bring it together would give me a more comprehensive picture of what is going on. So we do that step. So the specific things we look for in the textual description of an attack, whether it's a description of an attack, whether it's an after action report of forensics, whether it's a blog post, whether it's a tweet, we look for the same kind of things. The particular named entities we look for are exploit targets, certain file names that may be used, version numbers of products, what weaknesses are being exploited, what software is being run, what is the vulnerability, what IP addresses may be involved, the SHA hashes of certain files, what tools are being used, what data might be observed to detect that that attack is happening, whether it's a certain malware family, etc. And what course of action you might do when such an attack happens. So you see that there's a lot of these entities. And what we want is building a system that can read, and this is back from the Nikon report I showed you earlier, which uses a Helsing malware. So I can read this report and I can extract certain terms, right? Spear phishing target, suspicious email, Helsing malware. These are all named entities for which we actually have to use. So this one is saying we are using CRFs, conditional random fields. But since then, since I created this slide about a year ago, my students have worked with in fact, the student that's working with this now also has a Kolkata connection. His name is Oritran, and Oritran came to us from Jadavpur. And the other student working in this area also has a Kolkata connection. Her name is Ananta, and Ananta also came to us from Jadavpur. So of late we have used other deep learning techniques such as BILSTMs and CNNs to get even better accuracies. But so you need sort of a fairly sophisticated NER system to detect these, but there are other things like the IP address that may be involved in an attack, the hash of a file that might be involved in an attack. You can just write regular expressions. So you don't want to force this sophisticated system to pick out the obvious things, but you need it to pick out the non-obvious things. And as you see, we can get pretty good accuracy. We have about 54,240 words from CVE, from Microsoft Security Bulletin, from Adobe Security Bulletin, and various blogs. And we did a training and a test split. As you can see, the results are pretty encouraging. So you also want to extract relationships, and the kind of relationships we look for are, for example, a vulnerability has a mitigation. So that's the relationship. And what is the mitigation? It's a certain course of action. The course of action has a certain cost. An attacker who's attacking you has a related incident, something else. You might want to say an attack is launched by a particular attacker, a system is under attack with a particular consequence, etc. So these are the kind of relationships we want to extract, and the way we do that extraction is for each term that our named entity recognizer finds, for each pair of terms that occur roughly within the same sentence, we ask this system the question, the deep learning system the question, is there a possible relationship, right? And the relationship is limited. I've shown you a few here. There are about 30 that we think that the security community is interested in that we ask for. So we're not asking a general question, right? I'm not giving you two random nouns and saying, find me a relationship between them. That's a very hard problem. I'm just saying, I'm going to give you two nouns that come from, security related world. And I want to see if one of the 30, 40, 50 potential relationships that are of concern to the security community exists between these two nouns, these two named entities. And the way we do it is by using word embeddings and then deep neural networks. This is not the time or the occasion to go into the details of the technique. This work has been published. And an extended version of this work has just been accepted by an IEEE journal, so it'll show up there too. But what you want to do then is to have the system read a piece of text like this and figure out that SSL 3.0 has a vulnerability, which is a person in the middle attack. There's a software called SpyGen, which exploits this vulnerability, and you have certain hackers that are targeting Chrome because Chrome uses SSL 3. Well, it doesn't anymore, but at some point used to use SSL 3.0. This is exactly what, going back to the text I showed you earlier, this is my running example of the Nikon hack on using Helsing malware. So, you can find these kinds of relationship that Nikon targets users using spear phishing. It uses a suspicious email. It uses the Helsing malware, which is these hashes. And we evaluated that by averaging on annotated action reports. And now this is telling you something interesting, right? Which is telling you the breadth of your training set. So if I go back, you might say, Professor Joshi, you were saying that the NER accuracy is like nearly 90%. But it's nearly 90% on this data set. Now, if I go to a completely brand new data set, the accuracy is still respectable. And actually it goes up significantly once we take small parts of this new data set of after action reports and train on that also. But even on a completely unseen area where we're able to get an F1 score of about 0.75 for named entity recognition. And of these terms that we extract, we're doing extremely well in identifying relationships in that. And then again, you can see, so this is, just to give you an example, then this is one of the pieces of malware that we identified. One of the pieces of text after action reports that we read. And from this, we are able to create this knowledge graph. Obviously, remember, these knowledge graphs are meant for the computer to use and consume. So looking at them doesn't necessarily make sense. But what you're saying is that Helsing is a kind of malware. It uses certain backdoors. It's been exploited by Nikon, which is also using the XWeber tools. And here are some file hashes that are involved. Right, and they're a part of a certain attack pattern that certain attackers use, and then you're seeing how they are introduced, on blank documents that come to you, file downloads, etc. Here is another document in the after action report that talks about the same malware, but this one is actually not so much free text, but various hashes that the malware uses. The files that it touches in your system, and some domains it registers for its command and control system, right? So, so these are the domains and the fake addresses that are created to be owners of that domain. Again, you can read that and construct another knowledge graph, right? And then what you can do is you can take both of these knowledge graphs, and because they're both talking about the Helsing malware, you can actually fuse these knowledge graphs, and now you have a much richer source of information that an analyst can query. So I'm realized I'm sort of running out of time and I want to give some time to answer questions. So I'll just say this. One of the interesting things that we have also done is to dress these knowledge graph with the word embeddings, which means that if you're querying this knowledge, normally when you query a knowledge graph and you're looking for an answer, there is a reasoning process. And for those of you who are familiar, that reasoning process can be fairly slow. But for certain kinds of queries, for example, let me see. So you're talking about Microsoft Internet Explorer, which has a certain vulnerability, right? So you might want to, an analyst might want to say, show me other tools that have the same vulnerability, right? So normally what you would do is you would sort of do the reasoning, which is you will walk the graph effectively and find every place where there is a incoming has vulnerability link to the execute arbitrary code. And then, see if there is a link that says it is similar to Microsoft Internet Explorer. Instead, if I had the word embeddings, what I could do is to use the word embeddings to find the subset of nodes in that graph that are similar to Internet Explorer. And then only for that subset of nodes, look to see if there is a link to execute arbitrary code. So I'll skip all of these details. Basically just say that you can sort of write queries like this. And if you have systems like this, you can do something. You can do something very interesting. This was a student. This was a work published by an undergraduate that worked with us in our lab, Lawrence O'Neill. He's now a graduate student doing his PhD at North Carolina State University. But what we said was, okay, if you have a system like this, what about all? So many times if you're working for an organization, be it a government organization, be it a company, you will be asked to develop some system, and you will say, okay, I can use this open source system and that open source system and combine them and write some of my own code and build a piece of tool. But you have no idea what vulnerabilities you are introducing into your system because you've called particular libraries. And so what we do is we actually read the GitHub descriptions of all the open source softwares. We look at what libraries they're using. We find what vulnerabilities are in their library, and then we connect them back to the tool you are building, saying, if you are using these particular libraries, you are likely to have these vulnerabilities in your code that you should be aware of. And another work that was done by a different undergraduate student, Priyanka Ranade, she works for Northrop Grumman now, was to use these vector space embeddings to try to translate threat intelligence that is not in English. So the reality of the world is that if you're looking from an American perspective, the threat intelligence you are interested in being in advanced knowledge of is probably in Russian or Chinese, right? I mean, if you're in the Indian perspective, you can figure out what languages you are interested in. And so the idea is normally what you would do is you would either have an expert in that language look at it, or you will run it through something like Google Translate. And long and short of it is Google Translate doesn't work very well, but if you build a system that's geared towards the cybersecurity domain, it works much better. So I'm going to skip because there's, oops, I just want to stop here. I will stop here, and I will stop my presentation and see what the questions are that I may be able to answer. Rakesh, I'll answer your question offline. You and I can talk directly. Yeah, we can talk offline because I want to answer the student questions. So Abu Rashid wants to know if an attacker uses a modified public exploit or merge modified. Abu, the way you address this is what I was talking about earlier, which is to say that if you're familiar with what already exists, right, and what kind of behavioral characteristics it has, you can certainly say, I understand that. So even if you're using a slightly modified version of that vector to come in and attack, what you will end up doing, like encrypting my master boot record, for example, is the same. So I will use those features because I understand those common features, having read a lot of descriptions. Chanchal wants to know phishing email detection. Can I get good? So Chanchal, that question is very hard to answer without doing actual. There is a recent paper in Cryptologia. Can I request everyone to please be on mute? There's a lot of noise in the background. So Chanchal, just this is a question that is hard to answer without actually doing the experiment. I encourage you to do the experiment. A lot of these machine learning tools are easily available, also deep learning tools. And there are certainly phishing dataset collections. There's a very nice paper that our student published in Cryptologia earlier this year about actually doing phishing and how easy is it to get students to click on phishing links that you might find. Kaushik wants to know how can we get feed from dark web with the help of AI. Kaushik, you have to build these kind of dark web is the hardest thing to deal with, certainly in an academic setting, because our systems people, our information technology people get very unhappy when we try to connect to dark web sites and things like that. So what we did was we had a collaboration with Interpol for a little bit. It's no longer active. And Interpol has a nice collection of this kind of stuff on the dark web. Although most of it, I'll be honest, is not about cybersecurity. It's more about selling drugs and pornography and things like that. But they have a data set that has some cybersecurity information. I'm going to look in the chat box. So Sandeep wants to know how a trust model will be. Oh, that's probably for Professor Bertino. Yeah. And Pinaki is saying these were done by shadow brokers in World 7. You're right, Pinaki, they were. And I don't see any further questions. Tuhin, sure, I can share the slides with Professor Giri, and then he can distribute further. And so I think I've now answered all the questions that were available. Pinaki, or I don't know which particular product you are referring to. If you're referring to the system we built, no, it's not open source. It's an experimental system. It's academic research. So it's not in a state that I can just transfer it over. But if you are interested in collaboration, we can talk. So thank you very much. Once again, I appreciate the opportunity and I'm delighted to be here today. And I guess my very distinguished colleague, Professor Bhavani, is next.
So thank you, Professor Joshi, for your valuable speech and to the participants. Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the kind
words. Thank you. Yeah. Very nice. You see, I think you are having that cybersecurity program in BSc and MSc, and that will be helpful to our students also.
I'm delighted to talk about you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Joshi, for your presentation. Now our next speaker is Professor Bhavani Uraisingam. She is a founder, chair professor of computer science and the director of the Cybersecurity Research and Education Institute of the University of Dallas, USA. She is also visiting senior research fellow at King College University of London, and she is an elected fellow of the ACM, IEEE, AAS, and the NAI and she has published more than 130 international journal papers, 300 plus international conference papers, 160 plus keynote speech, and she is having that 6 patents, 15 books. Now I request to Professor Bhavan, if the platform is for you, and now you can start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Giri, for that great introduction. And thanks for inviting me to give this webinar, and also for all three of us, Professor Bertino and Professor Joshi and myself, to be able to give this presentation. And so at this time, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so can you, just a second, I'm trying to, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, it is now
It
coming.
is visible.
Okay.
It is visible. It is visible.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I will just put it into, okay. So my talk is going to be cloud-centric assured information sharing for secure social networking. And this work was funded by the United States Air Force over a long period of time. And actually some of this work we did collaboratively with Professor Bertino's team at Purdue and Professor Joshi's team at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So we had a 5-year project together with the Air Force. And then after that, we continued with some other projects. And so I'm glad that Professor Bertino and Professor Joshi were able to give talks on IoT security as well as AI and security. So this is sort of complements what they have been talking about. So I have a lot of charts, but so what I'm going to do is try and finish everything within an hour. So I might skip some of the charts. So I'm going to start with how this all started for us. We had an NSF workshop on big data security and privacy. That was actually 6 years ago. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the results of that workshop. And then I'll talk about some of the sample systems and that we designed and developed. One is on cloud-centric assured information sharing. And then the other one was secure social networking. And then some directions. In fact, some directions such as data security and privacy for IoT, Professor Bertino has talked at some length, and areas like secure data science, Professor Joshi has talked about it. Okay, so we had an NSF workshop, and I think a lot of the charts are pretty self-explanatory. And so we had this workshop in 2014. I was a general chair, and Professor Bertino was the program chair together with another colleague of mine. And so we also had representation from UMBC. So we had an interdisciplinary workshop. We had computer and data scientists, cybersecurity researchers, social scientists, natural science, in particular atmospheric physics. And we also had people from industry, government, and academia. And so we had two major objectives: security and privacy for big data, and big data management and analytics for cybersecurity. And so we had some keynote presentations, position paper, then we had breakout sessions. We submitted our results to the National Privacy Research Strategy, and then we presented our work at the interagency conference or workshop on data privacy. And so what were some of the results? So big data management and analytics, we know that we have lots and lots of data being collected for many tasks, for healthcare, especially with COVID-19. There's a lot of work on big data analytics, a lot of applications, financial applications, and even cybersecurity applications. So the tasks include areas like user authentication, access control, anomaly detection. For cybersecurity, we can apply big data techniques because lots of cybersecurity data are being collected. So by analyzing all of the data, right, we can help with homeland protection, disease outbreaks, and so on. So the problem here is that the data that we collect, even if we anonymize it, we can remove all the identifiers and put all the data together. And when we link it, we can re-identify the individual. So we don't want people to know that certain person has got AIDS or some other, maybe even COVID-19. You know, we want to protect the privacy of the patients. So security tasks, say like authentication and so on, multi-factor authentication, we may need to collect a lot of information about the individuals. So if the information is misused or stolen, it can lead to privacy breaches. So what are some of the solutions, right? There are solutions based on privacy enhanced techniques. I mean, there have been solutions based on that for quite a while, for the last 20 years actually, but there are still a lot of areas that need further work, developing scalable solutions. Cryptography techniques are showing promise, but do they scale? Another area is privacy preserving record matching. So you have different records, but then as I said, you can put it together and infer the individual's name and so on, identify the individual. So how can we match the records in a privacy preserving way? Another area that we focused on during the workshop was privacy preserving collaborative data analytics. That means instead of having everything centralized, that means there is more possibility for privacy and confidentiality concerns, breaches. Why don't we keep everything distributed and carry out data analytics, perhaps on encrypted data? Another area was privacy preserving biometric authentication. And here we looked at areas like templates for user biometrics representation, working on zero knowledge protocol. So these were some of the results the workshop participants, some of the ideas they came up with. So one of the major results or contributions of this workshop was to come up with a multi-objective framework optimization. It sort of becomes a dynamic programming problem. So for instance, we can have all the privacy we want, but if we randomize and perturb the data so much that the data might become useless, we don't want that. What happens if we put all these privacy controls and it gets enormously expensive, right? So we have to come up with a balance between utility and the risk of privacy and the constraints. So at one time, we may want to minimize the cost, and then we want to maximize the utility of the data and minimize the privacy risks. And another time, we may want to have as much privacy as possible, as well as utility, but maybe the cost may not be as much of a concern. So these are some of the trade-offs that we have to make between cost and the utility of the data and the constraints and the risk, right? So this is something that we proposed, and there are some groups actually that are already working on coming up with this multi-objective optimization framework. And one of my colleagues at UT Dallas, Dr. Murad Kantarjalu, who was a co-chair with Professor Bertino at this workshop, he has come up with some good models on this multi-objective optimization framework. He's working with risk analysts and some mathematicians and statisticians to come up with the framework. Okay, so what were the research challenges? There was data confidentiality. Now we are dealing with massive data, right? Remember the 5 V's, which is variety, volume, veracity, value, and I think some other V's. So there are 5 V's altogether. And so we cannot have one policy, one type of access control. We may need different policies, different types of access control models. And so we also have to enforce these access control models on multimedia, heterogeneous data. And so what about enforcing access control on big data stores like Hadoop, MapReduce framework, Spark framework, automatically designing and evolving and managing these policies? That's the challenge with respect to data confidentiality. For respect to privacy, we discussed about privacy preserving data correlations, right? What sort of approaches? We want personal privacy and to some extent, we want population privacy, right? Sometimes I think personal privacy is very important. The fact that John Smith has got AIDS or COVID, but people living in a certain area are more susceptible to COVID, right? So you may, in certain cases, you want personal privacy, but not population privacy. In some cases, you may want both. But whatever techniques, they have to scale. That's the challenge. And then usability, right? So you need policies that are usable, that can, what's the point in developing all these systems when people cannot use them, right? Users have to understand. And approaches for data services monetization. So instead of selling the data, how about selling the services, right? And then data publication. Some felt that, we may not want to publish the data, right? So that's another challenge that we are faced with. And then privacy implication on data quality. You can enforce all kinds of privacy, but what happens if the data is really bad, right? By perturbing and so on. What about risk models? And again, for big data, right, we may need to come up with appropriate risk models. What about data ownership? There was some discussion, instead of owning the data, what about talking about stakeholders, human factors? There has to be human involved. What about the data lifecycle framework? This was something, and I'll talk later about it, that we have done some work together with Purdue on policy-aware, privacy-aware, policy-based data lifecycle. Policies have to guide the data acquisition, data storage, data integration, data sharing, data analytics, as well as data deletion. Okay, so that was something the group was talking about, one group. Then another group focused on big data for security, right? So what is different about big data? So big data, like data mining for cybersecurity, there's a lot of work. And Dr. Joshi talked about AI for security. So when we are applying big data analytics for security, again, the whole idea is that there's lots and lots of data. How do the big data analytics tools work? What is the right architecture? Okay, so we spent some time talking about the right types of architectures and how can you share the cybersecurity data, right? Some organizations are reluctant to share the cybersecurity data. In fact, both Professor Bertino and Professor Joshi had given some excellent examples of what happens of cybersecurity attacks, but we need a way for companies to share the data. That way, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And another group was talking about, okay, so it's great that we want to detect the big data, cybersecurity attacks using big data, but can big data analytics, and by that I also mean machine learning AI, prevent these attacks? That means try to figure out how, understand the attacker, how to figure out how the attacks are going to, the malware is going to change patterns, and then predict, and then be proactive. What about big data analytics for digital forensics? And can we use big data to understand the users of the cyber systems, the behavior of the users? So these were some of the things that the workshop participants came up with, which we presented to the US government. Again, massive amounts of data being collected, investigated the issues surrounding big data security and privacy. One aspect, which is here, we did not talk about it at that time. Remember, this was 6 years ago. But now one of the hottest areas in cybersecurity is what happens if the big data techniques, and such as the machine learning, the AI techniques are attacked, right? Need to investigate attacks to the big data. So machine learning is attacked. That whole area has come to be known as adversarial machine learning, because the adversary is learning our machine learning models, our big data models, and our data, and is trying to thwart us. So we try to adapt our machine learning algorithms and then try to thwart the adversary. Over time, it sort of becomes game playing between us and the adversary. Regardless of what we do, we need scalable and practical solutions. Again, I talked about the life cycle of data. We have to understand not only the societal impact, but also an analysis, and need to formulate laws and policies. We can't just work on this as computer scientists and data scientists or information technology. We've got to work with the policymakers. And so I mentioned when I presented this to the government that we need intra and interagency programs, but this is not really a US problem because look, things like the pandemic, right? It's a global problem, right? We have the COVID-19 in India, COVID-19 in US, in Europe, everywhere. And so we need appropriate security techniques. We're all using online, online, and we are working online. What happens if our Zoom systems are attacked? Our data is attacked. And the other thing is, what about the privacy of the individuals, right? So we have got this massive global scale data problem, and we need to ensure the security and privacy, especially the way things are today. Okay, so that gives you a sort of a snapshot of where we are going with respect to big data, security, and privacy. In fact, I'm teaching a graduate course at UT Dallas this semester because we got some funding from NSF to develop some courses, and that was on big data security, and that's on the big data security and privacy. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about, so I finished the first part. So the second part of my talk is, remember, we want to talk about cloud-based assured information sharing. Okay, so what is assured information sharing? First, we talk about different organizations have to share data. So we have been doing a lot of work over like 10 years on this topic. So first we started with policy-based information sharing very briefly. And then we talked about, so that means when partners, we assume the partners are trustworthy, but yet we have to enforce policies to share the data, right? And so, and then again, we're assuming lots of data being collected, but then people are not really sharing data because people get very concerned. When they share data, they think, are we trying to share some sensitive data or private data? So sometimes we have to give them incentives, and we need to look at what are the risks of sharing data, what sort of incentives do we get. Then the other area of sharing data is that with sort of partners who are not trustworthy, we were looking at applying game theory. So we kind of play games with each other in the sense that we want to try and extract as much information from our partners without giving out much information. So the first bullet here, we are assuming it's fairly trustworthy, so we are not playing games. And then the third bullet is the partners could be totally untrustworthy, but what we want to do here is not just play games. I mean, we want to monitor our partners, right? Essentially carry out some intelligence gathering about our partners. So these were three directions, but I'm only going to talk about enforcing policies and determining how much information has been lost. Okay, so that's what I'll be talking about. Sorry, this chart should be coming before the other one, right? Because I finished the first topic, NSA workshop on big data security. Now we are going to start with sample systems, cloud-centric assured information sharing, and social networking. So I start with assured information sharing. Okay, so now what are the types of policies? Okay, so the types of policies, I just want to look at the time. The types of policies that we are enforcing, things like, okay, agency 1 wants to share information with agency 2. So I'm asking agency 2, okay, give me some of your resources I want to share. So agency, but it says I will share with you only if you share with me, right? Or agency 1 will ask agency 2, give me justification, why do you need this data? Or agency 1 can tell agency 2, I will share with you provided you don't share with agency 3. So I'll give you an example of our real world, how we implemented such a system. So agency 1 shares a resource with agency 2 for a certain amount of time only. Or before we share, we try to figure out, does agency 2 has got additional information that they can use to gather highly sensitive and private information. So these were some of the policies that we implemented. So our initial implementation, we didn't have a cloud or we didn't have any other, global system. It was all internal, where we said, okay, we had databases which stored Texas Medicaid data, privacy, the identification had all been removed. And we had a simple implementation where we implemented XACML, Extensible Access Control Markup Language Policy Engine. It comes with policy enforcement point, policy decision point. The user is querying, and the results go to these various policy bases, and then, the databases, and then according to the policies, the data is shared. So it's a very simple prototype. We worked on it and then we demonstrated it, okay? So at that time we said, wouldn't it be great if we can go global? So we had a joint project between US, Europe, London, and Italy, okay? So UT Dallas, King's College, University of London, and University of Insubria in Italy, where we worked on the foundations of information sharing and also secure information sharing, and also developed a prototype to function in the cloud. Wouldn't it be great if all these organizations, right, across the world can store the data and their policies in the cloud? But one big problem, the cloud is not secure. So what's the point in using the cloud for a secure operation like information sharing securely if the cloud is not secure? So we had a second project that looked at security for the cloud. Okay, so we developed a layered framework. So the what's in the left-hand side is shows a basic layers where we had secure virtual network monitor. We didn't really touch on that, the networking part, but we looked at hypervisor. Virtual machine monitor is the hypervisor security. We looked at Hadoop and MapReduce security. So our cloud was built on Hadoop MapReduce framework. And then we looked at secure cloud data manager, and the user interface was the different applications. We had policies, quality of service, risk, cost, and cloud to monitor the cloud. And the right-hand side shows the different technologies. The ones in blue are something that we really completed. The ones in red are project completed, but the ones in red, there's still a lot of pink, lot of work still to be done, right? We only looked at assured information sharing and briefly secure social networking, but there's a lot more things to be done on secure hypervisors and looking at the risks and costs. So I'm going to talk more in detail about our secure query processing, and very briefly touch about what we did in the other areas. Okay, so for secure query processing, for information sharing, of course, right, the cloud. Okay, so one more thing is that our layered framework is, we had bits and pieces. Remember, we are a university, we are not a system integrator. So we had security for each of these boxes, but eventually we have to integrate them. What we are hoping is a company, sort of a defense contractor or any other company would build a complete system for information sharing. Okay, so for secure query processing, what did we do? So we studied clouds based on the Hadoop MapReduce. The research is actually how to rewrite the query according to these policies, right? Our policies were specified in XACML as well as semantic web languages. Actually, Dr. Joshi talked about knowledge graphs. Before all these knowledge graphs came the semantic web languages like RDF, which is, you can think of it as a knowledge graph. And so our policies were specified in XACML and RDF. So we developed two systems. One was, again, using big data technology. One was query processing with Hive, secure query processing. The other was secure query processing with RDF data. And we demonstrated our system with initially XACML, Extensible Access Control Markup Language Policies, jointly with King's College and University of Insubria. I'm going to show you our demonstration systems. Okay, so what was the first system? We used Hive. Hive was developed by Facebook. It's a relational database system, big data that Facebook developed, again, to support their Facebook applications. So after they designed and developed that system, maybe it was not large enough for them. So they made it open source. It's now an open source software. So we can use it for many applications, but it's operating in the cloud. So Hive is a relational database system already available for us operating in a cloud. So what we had to do was to implement only the policy engine. The policy engine was based on XACML. And so user is querying in SQL. The policy engine looks at the policies and rewrites the queries for efficient execution according to the policies. Okay, so that was one system we designed. But then relational data works well, but really for other non-relational data, we felt that maybe Hive may not be the best solution. How about using RDF for non-relational data? So RDF is a semantic web language. So that's what we designed and developed. But there was a big problem. RDF databases at that time, we had JENA, J-E-N-A, developed at HP Labs. And there were some other systems, but for us, the JENA was not scaling for the cloud. Okay, so JENA was not implemented for the cloud. And the queries were, RDF query language was in Sparkle. So we didn't really have a system equivalent to Hive for query processing for semantic web data, that is all the non-relational data. And so essentially we didn't have a Hive equivalent. See, we have Hive here for relational. We didn't have a Hive equivalent for semantic web data. So that was a big problem. So we had to implement entirely a data manager operating in the cloud for this semantic web data. So the data manager, we call it the Sparkle Query Optimizer. We had two components. One is the data preprocessor. Lots of data comes in. RDF data is in triples, and then we optimize these RDF data for preprocessing. And then on the other side, we have XACML policies and the query, we rewrite the query and generate the plans. And then we sort of merge the two components, the data preprocessing and the MapReduce framework, we merge it. And so that was really a Sparkle Query Optimizer. And we implemented secure query processing based on XACML. Okay, so now we have these two systems, one for relational, non-relational, and we had a demonstration system, 3 agencies. So we pretended, right? Agency 1 is Dallas, UT Dallas. Agency 2 is King's College, University of London. And agency 3 is University of Insubria, Italy. And we had these 2 query processors. So all of the data and policies are stored in one cloud. The cloud was at UT Dallas. And we had fine-grained access control with Hive, that is for relational data, and the Sparkle data, RDF data. We had query processing with RDF data. We used a second Sparkle Query Optimizer. So it really worked, okay, but it was not scaling. So we thought the reason it was not scaling, right, is because we had access control policies were in XACML. Then we had relational data, which is Hive. Then we have RDF data on this side. So we had all of this impedance mismatch. So we said, okay, why not do everything in RDF? And that was also a good research project for our students, okay? So, right, so we have the query optimizer, but we don't have a policy engine. Remember, we had policy engine was in XACML, but we need an RDF policy engine. Fortunately, one of my students had developed an RDF policy engine, not working in the cloud, using JENA. So query comes in, we had Pellet, developed at University of Maryland, College Park, and then all of the policies, ontologies in RDF. We had the RDF database and the RDF documents. The query comes in, looking at all the policies, and then retrieving the data. The policy engine will check to see whether the policies, whether the data should be given to the user. It can do some inferencing to decide whether the user can infer some additional information. So this was really a good policy engine, but another problem, it was not working in the cloud. And so we had to re-implement. We can't just take the whole thing and put it in one node in the cloud. That way we are not taking any advantage of the cloud. So we had to re-implement this entire policy engine, and that's what we did here. So we re-implemented this policy engine, and now we had this perfect system where we had the policy engine operating in the cloud and the data engine operating in the cloud. And so we demonstrated, again, the same information sharing between US, UK, and Italy. And we had multiple clouds as well. So all of our data and policies were in the cloud. And when agency 2, so when London asks us for some data, we tell London, okay, we will share with you, provided you don't share it with Italy. Or we tell London, okay, we will share something with you, provided you share something with us. And all of this was happening in the cloud-based query processing, right? Our query processors, we have our policy engine, we have our data processor, and we have our MapReduce query processor. So all of them would do the actual work, and it was all operating in the cloud. And so we demonstrated the system, and it did perform actually better, okay, than our earlier system. And it also worked for multiple clouds. So essentially, where does it connect with big data? Of course, the whole implementation, right? A Sparkle query optimizer can handle billions of triples, RDF triples. So it's massive amounts of data, and it now can handle relational data as well as non-relational data. It's multimedia. So we had volume, and we also had variety. Of course, we didn't have all 5, but then we also had the security. So it shows how we can integrate the cloud, big data, even Hive is considered to be big data technology. So big data technology, the cloud, and security, how we integrated everything. Okay, so some additional things we did very briefly, secure storage and hybrid query processing in the hybrid cloud. So we also looked at, right, IBM was coming up, IBM was really saying that hybrid cloud is the way to go. That means we use the public cloud for data that is not highly sensitive, and we build a private cloud, say within the company, where we can store the sensitive data. One of the biggest barriers, right, to adopting the cloud is security. Why? Because you can store encrypted data in the cloud, but once you decrypt it, right, the whole value, right, once you decrypt it, then it can be attacked. Security is gone. So you have a private cloud for sensitive data, public cloud for non-sensitive data. And so the whole idea is, how do you distribute the data? Which data should you put in the private cloud, which data in the public cloud, and how do you distribute the data? What are the costs involved? So we did some joint work with University of California, Irvine, and we published some interesting papers on how to store the data in a hybrid cloud. That was another project. A third project was also talking about, we focused on the hypervisor, another colleague of mine. We worked on the hypervisor. So why do you need hypervisors? Because in a cloud, sometimes you put several operating systems into one machine. It's like several guest operating systems, and there's only one host operating system. So in a Windows machine, you can put in Solaris, XP, Mac, Linux, and Mac, and all the other operating systems, right? But how do you protect these operating systems from one another? The hypervisor provides that protection, provides separation between these operating systems. And so our investigation, should you put the the monitoring of all these attacks at the hypervisor level? That's Zen. We use Zen for the, it was developed originally University of Cambridge, England, and Zen is a hypervisor. Or do you put the monitoring at the the operating system level, right? So we did some trade-offs, used some formal methods. And so that was one of another side project based on secure cloud, okay? Another thing we did was, okay, everybody says cloud is scalable. We need cloud for big data. Why? Because cloud provides scalable solutions. So we wanted to test it. So we took some of our machine learning algorithms for malware detection, right? So we had a number of machine learning, we had a toolkit, number of machine learning algorithms for malware. And so we re-implemented some of those algorithms in the cloud. And yes, so we did get much better performance using the cloud than we would have without the cloud. Okay, so without a doubt, cloud is providing. We just wanted to confirm it. So cloud does provide scalable solutions for a number of applications, including for malware analysis. Okay, another side project was identity management, right? We can have all the wonderful access control and all the monitoring and so on. But what happens if you don't have identification and authentication? So cloud is based on web services, and there are web services like SAML, security assertion marker, sorry, the identification security assertion markup language, and access control XACML. And so these were developed for web services, SAML for identification and authentication, XACML for web services. So one of my colleagues looked at these technologies to see, are they scalable for the cloud? Okay, and it looks like most clouds now use SAML and XACML for identification, authentication, and access control. Okay, so this finishes my cloud-based information sharing. Next, I will briefly talk about analyzing and securing social networks. So I'm going to skip the first two very briefly. So we know that social network analytics is one of the hottest areas, right? So it can be used for marketing purposes, for friend purposes, for clustering groups with similar interests, location, finding the location. What is the point in advertising to a person living in California about a person, about a Pizza Hut pizza restaurant in Texas, in Dallas, right? So we want to find the location, but people will want to keep their location private. In fact, my iPhones, I never divulge my location. So, but we still want to figure out the location so you can help the marketing purposes. But that is a big problem with respect to privacy. Okay, so we did a lot of work on data, social media analytics. In fact, Professor Senorita talked about some very interesting things that I would like to follow up with her. Okay, so we did some location analytics. So I'm going to sort of skip some of the things. Location analytics work. Demographic analytics. So we developed a system called Tweeted. Very simply put, we said that, you know, we go to friends of friends of friends of friends until we get the location of the individual, right? So I'm putting it very straightforward, but what I'm saying is we were able to find with fair accuracy. We took into consideration people may have moved, where are their friends, lots of other things that we took into consideration in order to determine the location. However, what we all know that divulging the location, on the other hand, will violate the privacy because we don't want to tell people where we are, right? So without a doubt, we did a lot of work on social network and analytics, but there is a privacy problem. Okay, so we know that. So this is an algorithm, but we know there's a privacy problem. So how do we handle the privacy problem? So we thought about, okay, first we want to show that there is indeed a privacy violation. And then we decided, okay, then let's find some solutions. So we looked at the DFW area. We looked at the graph model, 167,000 profiles. We had 3 million links and several traits. Some traits are pretty obvious. So what did we want to find? We wanted to determine, based on the social media profile, is a person liberal or conservative? We got huge coverage in ABC News, Boston Globe. Why? Because at the same time, MIT also was doing a similar study to determine whether a person is gay or person is straight by just looking at the social media profile. But of course, you know, I might say that I like Trump, or I might say I like Biden, then we would know immediately whether I'm a liberal or a conservative. So we want to hide those traits that are pretty obvious, right? So anyway, diameter of the largest component in our experiments, 16, number of nodes, 167,000, number of links, 3 million, number of traits, 4 million attributes, unique traits, 110,000. So the probability of liberal in the DFW is about 45%, probability of conservative is 55%. And we used various machine learning, naive Bayesian, and we removed all the traits that were pretty obvious, right? So for instance, when you say you want to legalize same-sex marriage, we know that is a liberal trait. Or when we say government religion is a disaster, or equal rights for gays, we know they are liberal traits. So we removed all those traits. And similarly, conservative traits, such as protect marriage between one man and one woman. So we took all the conservative traits, and I haven't come up with our results because it's in our paper. And we were able to show with fair accuracy that we have removed all the obvious attributes, but still based on what they posted, non-obvious attributes, we were able to show with high level of accuracy whether a person is liberal or conservative. In the same way, MIT also at that time were able to show, they said, with high level of accuracy whether a person is gay or straight. Okay, so we know that social media analytics causes a privacy problem, right? So what do? So we decided, we thought about looking at privacy aware social media. So we did a little bit of work, but then we figured that, in order to, we really didn't continue in that direction, because in the end, it's up to the social media companies, right? So before we post something, it will be really great if the social media companies can verify what we are posting, right? Can this violate the privacy of somebody? Is this going to cause some sensitive information to be divulged? So these were some of the solutions. So what we believe, again, I'll talk a little bit later, policy-based data, policy-based social media is what we need, okay? And so then we looked at access control for social media, right? So we talked about privacy. What about security? And so again, we did an experiment. We didn't use Facebook. What we did was we used semantic web-based technologies. There is among the semantic web community, there was a social network called FOF, friend of a friend. It's RDF-based network. So we use that for our experiments as social network. And the policies were based on album, photo sharing policies. So for example, our policies were specified in SWIRL, semantic web rules language. So we say that parents of Bob can control what Bob views. Here, second policy says that if Bob owns a photo, then all Bob's friends can see the photo. And then the third policy says that if we have a photo of Alice, then all of Alice's friends can see her photo. And the fourth one is more of a generalization of the other policies. So these are policies, sort of photo sharing, video sharing, whatever in social media. Right now, Facebook has got fairly coarse-grained policies. There are some things I would like to share with some people, although they are improving in their access control, more finer grain. There's a lot more that they can do. So what is our research here? Research, again, is in query rewriting, right? When a Sparkle query is posed, we rewrite the query for efficient execution, and we subsequently developed a system. This was done jointly with University of Insubria in Italy. So we had social network applications. All of the data was in a knowledge base. This is sort of Facebook data of FOF data in our case, friend of a friend. The policy has all of the security policies, access control policies, the reasoning engine. Reference monitor is that part of the system. It is critical, security critical part of the system that will mediate all the requests. So when the request comes in, the knowledge base the reference monitor will get the data from the knowledge base, and then semantic web reasoning engine will reason and look at the policies, and the reference monitor will decide finally, should the access be granted or not. Okay, so we designed and implemented, and then we thought, we haven't finished this part. What about bringing the cloud? Because with the social networking, remember cloud-based information sharing. So what about hosting this entire social networks, one network or multiple networks in the cloud? And then how do these different networks share information? That could be an interesting sort of experimental research problem for students. Okay, so now I'm going to the third part. I have only a few more charts. I think I can finish in about 5 minutes. So some directions, right? With data security and privacy lifecycle for IoT. Professor Bertino talked about IoT security. So I have a couple of charts. And then another area is trustworthy analytics. The third area, Dr. Joshi talked about some aspects of secure data science. So these are some more applications. Okay, security and privacy for IoT, right? So Dr. Bertino talked more of the protocol layer security, but we also have this data security. There is this movement called quantified self, right? We have so much of information being collected about us. But quantified self movement is an important movement that sociologists and psychologists are working on, is trying to get information about a person to help the person, like wearable devices, smartphones, and so on. to help the person better health habits, right, and so on. I would really like for someone, for my sort of a personal advisor to tell me before I start eating maybe, chocolate cake or something, oh, that's bad for you. You should not be eating that, right? It's really good for me, for my health wise. But on the other hand, I don't want people to be knowing, right, what I'm eating. So the quantified self movement on the one hand is going to help humanity. On the other hand, it's going to cause privacy violations, right? Data collection and sharing. So IoT, without a doubt, right? Dr. Bertino gave a great talk about the security of the IoT protocols, but it has also got some privacy concerns. So we worked together. We had some paper with Professor Bertino and my colleague Murat Kantarjalu. We said that, our cell phone, right? We are collecting health, fitness, location, social media, image, and so on. All of the data is being collected. How about coming up with a framework, data collection, data storage, data analytics, data sharing, and so on. Everything has to be policy aware, right? Some of the data could be stored in a cloud because our smartphone can't store everything. And some will be anonymized. So how about building a privacy aware, quantified self manager running on our mobile device? And so we are saying privacy aware, policy based. Every step of the way, policies have to guide. And we are computer scientists. So we just work on toy policies. Toy means TOY, like I give you something, you give me something, or I give you something provided you don't give it to somebody else. Those were the policies we implemented for cloud-based information sharing. But they are sort of like children's policies, right? John is telling Mary, okay, I will tell you a secret, but don't tell this to Jane. That's not what happens in the real world. Real world policies are very complex. So we are working also with the policy expert from our School of Social Sciences to come up with appropriate policies to guide this privacy-aware policy-based data lifecycle. Okay, so that's one area. The other area is trustworthy analytics, right? Because we have a lot of computations over big data. Big data analytics is really important, whether we are using it for healthcare or for finance or even for security applications. And often we give it to third-party servers for computation, and as a result, there are man-in-the-middle attacks, and the data owners may have to protect their data. So one approach that's showing promise is the Intel's SGX chip and machine and the hardware. Although recently there have been some issues with the Intel SGX, which we need to investigate further, but at least we use that to carry out trustworthy analytics. This is the Intel's SGX platform. So some of the machine learning, the big data analytics techniques could be implemented in special enclaves that SGX has. And that way, those enclaves are protected. So you cannot really penetrate, is what Intel is saying. Although there are some questions now about their technology, but still it worked. It's very promising technology that we can use. So essentially what we are doing here is providing security through hardware, but we have to decide which applications or which analytics portions of the analytics techniques have to be executed in the using the special hardware. Okay, so that's another area. And the last two charts, the last one before the last, is secure data science. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Of course, there are a number of areas: big data security and privacy, right? We talk about the privacy aware quantified self, right? All of this comes under, big data, secure data science. Another area is data science, machine learning, AI for cybersecurity. And Professor Joshi talked about, how data science can be applied for cybersecurity. And a fourth area that we are focusing on quite a bit, and in fact, we published one of the early papers in 2012 on how data science, machine learning, AI techniques could be attacked. That's the biggest worry, because these AI techniques are being applied. AI is everywhere now, right? It's being applied for finance, for retail, for healthcare, for security, you name it, they're applying AI. of a drug discovery. What happens if our drug discovery algorithms for COVID-19 vaccines, if those algorithms are attacked and they put the wrong ingredients, right? So, or wrong methods. So this is a very serious concern. How do we secure these machine learning techniques or data science or AI techniques? So that's a major concern, and there's a lot of work now. And one of the hottest areas, or most important and one of the important and hottest areas in cybersecurity. And of course, number of applications, right? I talked about, IoT is an example of an application. Then social media is an example of another application. Healthcare is an example of another application. So whatever techniques we come up with, it's nice to come up with general purpose techniques, but in general, these techniques are also application specific. Okay, so these are three areas that need a lot of work. And between us, I think, between Professor Bertino and Professor Joshi and myself, we covered some aspects of these critical areas that are emerging in data security and privacy. Okay, so I talked about three topics: NSF workshop on our big data security and privacy to set the stage. Then I talked about two sample systems. One is cloud-centric information sharing for massive amounts of data, and other is our work on secure social networking, privacy and security. And third, I provide some of the directions, right? Such as data security, privacy, lifecycle, trustworthy analytics, and secure data science. And if you want to contact me, my project coordinator is Ms. Rhonda Walls, and you have my email address. So this ends my presentation. So Dr. Giri, looks like there are some questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think most of these questions are, oh yeah. So I think, oh, Dr. Rakesh is there again. So,
So Bhavani, I think we should mention about Codify that Rakesh put on the.
Oh, okay. So by the way, there is a conference that Professor Anupam Joshi and Professor Rakesh Verma are organizing. And that is the flagship conference of data security and privacy. I'm in the steering committee. Elisa Bertino, Professor Bertino and Professor Ravi Sandhu, they were the founders. So Professor Verma says, I would like to remind all the participants that the ACM Codify, that is the Conference on Data and Application Security Privacy, deadline has been extended to October 4th for abstracts and October 11th for papers. And again, the information is at http://www.codaspy.org. And this is going to be, I believe, a virtual conference, which would have been in Baltimore. This is our flagship conference for our community, data security and privacy.
So I think I will add, Bhavani, that even if some of the students and faculty here are not able to submit a paper, we would encourage them to join us for the conference and listen to the lectures, because since it's virtual, there's, the cost is, I think, effectively close to zero, and there's no travel involved. So we'd be delighted to have people join in, and we'll share that detailed information on the normal publicity channels and also with Professor Giri later.
Right. So there are some. Yeah, so there was a question, can we try the system? And so we had this system is kind of old now, and we're planning to make some upgrades to the system. So you can email me and then I can let you know. We have also some other systems that we have developed in the meantime. So I will be able to give you some information. There is another question, how do we get feed from dark web with the help of AI? This is something that personally I haven't really looked at much, but again, some of these machine learning algorithms can maybe look at what's out there from dark web, but I'm not really qualified in that particular area, how we can apply AI to get the information from the dark web. So there was also some other, I think that might have been for Professor Joshi, I think, how a trust model will be effective to detect attack compromised node in the IoT system.
I think Bhavani, that was for Elisa, and I think Elisa answered that question.
Oh, that was for Elisa. Okay. So I think these are some of the questions. Right. So there was also some other question right. So some people are thanking me. So, right. So I think these were some of the questions. Let's see. If there aren't any more questions, Dr. Giri, I think I'm done.
Okay. So participants from your end, if you have any questions, then you can directly ask. Otherwise, you can put in the chat box. Participant.
Right.
Yeah. So you can quickly put in the chat box. Otherwise, you can directly ask the questions.
Right. Otherwise, you can also email me at bhavani.thuraisingam@UT-Dallas.
Yeah.
And I also want to, just a second, I'll sort of stop sharing now. Right. So I also want to address that particular question about whether we can share, whether they can try the system. But then as I said, the system was developed, demonstrated about 5 years ago. But we have a lot of enhancements that we have made, and I can get back to you on that.
So colleagues, I have also shared my email address. If there are further questions or interest in the topics I discussed, I'm happy to answer them offline.
And I also want to add, since we have a bit of time, 2 minutes. So we have a very strong, just like Purdue and University of Maryland, Baltimore County, we also have a very strong program in cybersecurity. We have, we are certified cybersecurity education, research, as well as cyber operations. We have 2 master's programs, one purely in computer science, one interdisciplinary program with policy, with management, with computer science. We have several PhD students. We have a minor at the bachelor's level. We may start a bachelor's program in cybersecurity. And in all aspects of security, one of the hottest areas right now is AI and security, as well as cyber physical system security. So we have a very broad range. And I have worked in cybersecurity now for 35 years. When I started at Honeywell, that's why Professor Bertino and Professor Joshi are saying they have been reading my papers with students. So I started my cybersecurity career at Honeywell in 1985, and then I was at MITRE Corporation in Massachusetts, and then US Government National Science Foundation before I came to UT Dallas. So anyway, just wanted to talk about sort of the background and the various courses that we have in cybersecurity. And we do a lot of work with Professor Joshi and Professor Bertino. And so, Professor Giri, I really like to thank you for inviting me and also for enabling me to form this group with Professor Bertino and Professor Joshi. As you can see,
thank you very much. So you see, thank you to all participants for your patience and to attend the webinar. We are thankful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor for continuously support and encourage to organize such type of events for the betterment of the society and the research community. My thanks goes to the Prem Kumar also. He is our webinar team. He can manage everything so that we are able to work just such type of events. And my hearty gratitude goes to the Professor Bertino, you see, and Professor Bhavani and Professor Anupam Joshi. So from their they are busy, but you see they are able to deliver their speech to the participants from their busy schedule. So I also thankful to the Professor Thurai Singham, that means Professor Bhavani. You see, without her help, I cannot organize such type of event, because you see, she has done a lot of work so to organize such type of events, because you see, she has managed with Professor Bertino and Professor Anupam Joshi also to organize such type of events. Thank you, Professor Bhavani. So for your kind help, I am able to organize such type of event.
So please let me know any other time I can bring some new faces and we can have, I feel very honored to be able to do this. And we are so many thousands of miles away and everything has gone without a glitch. And I always prepare for a backup. So yesterday, early morning, I think last night, I sent Dr. Giri a video because I had made a Zoom presentation of this, just in case technology breaks down, at least he will have the Zoom link to present. So it's that you are recording, Dr. Giri, right? You're recording the presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes. And you see, thank you all the participants and all the eminent speakers for delivering their valuable speech, and that will be helpful to our students and as well as the research community. And I also request to all the eminent speakers, if you organize such of events or other events, I will expect some help from your end, from you.
And please don't forget, Professor Giri, inform your community about CODASPI, that Professor Joshi and Professor Rakesh Verma from University of Houston, they are both organizing this CODASPI conference. Okay. They can send you the links.
If Professor Rakesh Verma send me the flyer, then I can put in our website, or I can send to our research community.
Right. So Professor Joshi and Professor Verma, Rakesh Verma will send it to you. And I'm really good for us to outreach because, just on a Saturday night, we had at one time I noticed there were 120 people, right, listening. Now it's gone down to about 80, which is still very good because I don't think we can get this kind of audience for a webinar, say, in other countries. So because of all the population and the great technical talent that you all have, right? So it is very very useful for us to do these things, and we can get students, and we can have, this way we don't have to travel, so we can have a lot of interactions. Maybe one day we can all have it in person when COVID is gone.
And you see, around 300 participants registered. But you see, parallel program going on. That is what some faculty and students have joined other programs also.
Yeah, so this is very good. That we were very. I was very happy. So
thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all participants and all eminent speakers. Professor Bhavani and Professor Anupam Joshi and Professor Batino, we can discuss that later on. And thank you all. But in our place, it is around